later, maybe when I'm doing that, that's when I'll give my views on the subject. Otherwise, thank you so much to my colleagues that have been part of the organizing team. We've been organizing this, as Diana said, for the last 7 years. I'm also proudly one of the founding members, which I think it's something I should add on my CV, in addition to being a host of various Zoom meetings, which should also appear on my CV. So thank you so much, my colleagues. Thank you so much, Isa. Thank you so much, UCCA. Unfortunately, this year we're not joined by other co-organizers we've always worked with. That is the Equal Opportunities Commission and the Uganda Human Rights Commission. But hopefully next year they will join us. Thank you so much.
Professor, for opening the conference. So right away, I will invite the panelists for our first panel, which will discuss the theme of campaign financing and its impact on service delivery. We will have Ms. Perry Aritua from Uganda, from Women's Democracy Network. You're welcome. We will have Mr. Henry Mugizi from the Alliance for Election Campaign Finance Monitoring. You're most welcome. We will have Mr. Garama Daniel, a legal scholar and advocate, join the panel. We will have Ms. Isabella Akiteng join the panel, which will be moderated by Mr. Arnold Kwesiga. You're most welcome. Oh, people didn't follow their sitting order, maybe. Mr. Daniel. You're most welcome.
Okay. Yeah, morning once again. My name is Arnold Kwesiga, has been introduced, and I will moderate this session. Yes, I know they have introduced the panelists as you can see them, but a little more because I'm really excited about this panel discussion as it brings in people with various experiences in democracy and political governance and electioneering, and maybe a little about them. Perry, I'll start with. Perry she's a well-known name in the circles. She has been around, especially around women's rights, but also issues to do with political governance. Perry is a lawyer by profession and a women's rights activist. She's currently the executive director of Women's Democracy Network, which is the Ugandan chapter, but has also served on the board of Uganda Women's Network, and also where she represents FIDA Uganda, which is Association of Women Lawyers. Perry has served also on the board of Action for Development, ACFOD, and through her work at Women's Democracy, she has gotten a number of women elected into parliament. So she's really speak on some of the issues that we're discussing today and the challenges that come with election campaign financing and its impact on service delivery. Maybe we'll be able to dive into that. to see whether the women she has had elected into parliament have managed to fulfill their manifestos and mandate as expected. Not only to parliament, but also Perry has worked with local council electoral processes and become very influential in ensuring that local councils become more effective in their fulfillment of mandate. She has also worked outside Uganda and has trained with political parties from Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania under the program for young politicians in Africa, and also worked with some of the political parties like the Democratic Party in the development of the 2016-2021 strategic plan. Perry, you're welcome again to the panel. The next panelist, Daniel Rugarama, is a Pan-African ideologist and thinker and has previously worked with the Electoral Commission for 10 years. So he will be really, really good in sharing his experiences from that angle, but also he's currently a PhD student of elections management at Makerere University. So you get to see the kind of panelists we have and the area of expertise that he has been involved in. But he's also a chairman of the Pan-African movement in Uganda and also an advocate with as agenda advocates. He's also a lecturer at the Islamic University in Uganda. Mr. Rugarama, you're welcome. Second last, Mr. Henry Muguzi. Muguzi is an expert on democratic governance and accountability in Africa. He's also the executive director of Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring, a Pan-African civil society organization founded in Uganda. And as I've been told, the only of its kind in Africa, if I stand corrected. Muguzi specializes in policy analysis and research on money in politics, as well as building citizen civic competence for political accountability. He has designed and implemented election campaign finance monitoring programs and campaign finance reform interventions, which are really, really critical in this discussion, but also from our previous appreciation of the electoral process and how money is playing a big factor. Mr. Muguzi, you're very welcome on this panel. Lastly, we have Miss Isabella Akiteng. She had warned me previously that I shouldn't speak around the youth angle of her work because she has moved on. But Isabel has, I think people that have engaged with Isabel a lot, and personally I got to meet Isabel while she was working with the Uganda Youth Network, and all discussions were youth focused. But now Isabel is part of the leadership team at FemFort Uganda, a movement building feminist institution, which is part of the National Election Watch Uganda initiative. She's very passionate about women's rights, governance and accountability, policy and advocacy, and also she has really 10 years within the civic society sphere or space, and very passionate about programs that deliver on tangible development for young people in any society. Sorry, every angle I take around your profile, it brings in young and youth in it. So, but Isabel, you're very welcome on this panel. Yes, and I will jump right into it. I know introductions have been made. People watched the day one. I hope you were able to watch live day one discussions on NTV. Specifically for this panel, looking at campaign election financing and its impact on service delivery. And I will really start with Mr. Rugarama as a student of election management, but also having worked with the Electoral Commission for 10 years. Your take, your opening remarks on the subject, and I will leave it as plain as that before we jump into discussions. What is your remarks when it comes to opening remarks when it comes to election campaign financing and its impact on service delivery in Uganda? And largely it's anchored around the whole discussion we'll be having, the role money is playing in Ugandan politics, but also what's the correlation with the current political dispensation and service delivery. Thank you.
Once again, good morning, comrades. First and foremost, campaign financing starts as soon as the voting ends. And to me, that is the biggest problem. Then, at the same time, that is when the ripple effects commence. The impact, therefore, of campaign financing, which in majority of the cases is actually negative, ranging from the campaigners, the participants, especially the politicians who have been elected into respective offices, having to mortgage their properties, obtain loans, once elected into offices, will continue on a spending spree back to the electorates because they must maintain the kind of stature which they cut when they were campaigning. Now, at the same time, you realize that the agents, there's a string of points that we must look at when we talk about campaign financing. Because political parties do campaign financing since they have got their own candidates to finance. The candidates themselves finance their own campaigns. The individuals, apart from the voters, such as the campaign managers, are spent on in the financing of the campaigns. There are a number of underlying negative impact, therefore, that fall from the campaign financing. At the same time, the impact, therefore, goes deep to people who are not necessarily within the spectrum, such as the families. It is therefore my take that save for the government or the political party in power, which certainly must spend during campaigns, the political parties which are not necessarily in power, which spend on its candidates, the agents, the campaign managers, who must be spent on by the candidates, the independent candidates themselves, who must finance their own campaign. There are other interest groups in between, including the voters, who stretch the line of campaign financing to the extent that in the cycle of the 5 years, the members, be it at the level of Honorable Member of Parliament, Councillor, LC5, President, stay campaigning, financing their campaigns.
I'm kind of trying to to grasp a lot of things that you say, but at the because it's really interesting how much money has been put in politics, and looking at, and I'm going to jump to Mr. Moguzi, how the Ugandan perception, the general perception now in Uganda is like politics means wealth. If every other thing has failed, it seems that people then join politics, or they try as much as possible to join politics, because it's not a leadership as it's supposed to be, or a service. It is a job. Some people do everything possible to get this job. I was reading some of the reports that have been published by the Alliance, and talking about, like, let's say the 2016 election, where you find the ruling government, NRM spent over 1 trillion. That's the data that is there. They gave about 50 million for all their candidates standing for women, member of parliament. They gave about 35 to 40, I think, for MPs, but it goes down also to local council and all the other areas. So when you find a party can spend 1 trillion Uganda shillings, that's not, it's not even the amount of money that is budgeted for the health sector in the budget, or then. So you find that you're dealing with a situation where we are looking at, if you don't have money, you can't join politics in Uganda now. So it means like, and the estimate saying for member of parliament, to contest for member of parliament in this country, you must have a minimum of 500 million. That's a minimum of 500 million. And it goes back to the same question I put to Rugarama, the correlation of the electoral process and leadership as we should know it, or democracy as we should know it. Mr. Muguzi, what's your take? And from your experience and expertise working on electoral financing and monitoring, what's your opinion around this kind of predicament the country finds itself in?
Thank you very much, Arnold, and thanks for having me here. Quite a pleasure for me to be sharing with you a subject that is so dear to my heart. I'll start with the great political philosopher, Cyndi Lauper. She's quoted to have said at one time that money changes everything. In a society that is developing, such as ours, money is a crucial determinant of who wins elections. And studies from the electoral cycles 2006, 2011, and what you have seen, money has been determining who wins in about over 80% of the cases. Of course, there are also other determinants. You look at the population we work with, the electorate of Uganda, everybody does seem to know or to perceive that a ballot paper has a price tag. And when you go deeper to understand the characteristics of our electorate, it does seem that the Ugandan electorate is not partisan, which is why you will see that the one will enter a polling station on the day of general elections, will pick up a ballot paper of presidential candidates. He will take Mr. Museveni. We'll go pick up a ballot paper of MPs, and we'll pick an FDC, vote for an FDC candidate. What that tells you is that the Ugandan electorate is not partisan. So there are other factors they are considering, and one of those has been money. No wonder politics, especially electoral politics, has been commercialized since 2006. But you ask a very important question. The question of the correlation between elections and leadership. What we are seeing in Uganda today is that you start by asking yourself a question anyway, that we believe as ACFIM that because money is a crucial determinant of who wins an election, if you look at scenarios, if you get the resources that the NRM, which is a mass party, so perceived, you take away the money and leave all the other resources with them and give all the money they have to the opposing candidate. Would the NRM go on and win? Probably won't. So it means, therefore, that money remains a crucial factor. And therefore, when it comes to contesting on electoral positions, it is clear to everybody that one needs money. Okay? You need money to popularize your candidature, but also the electorate does seem to be informed by how much you have given them. And I liked alluded to it, that campaign spending begins the moment an election ends. And therefore, for you to be considered for an election at the grassroots level, you needed to have demonstrated that you are a man of the people, and you do this by setting up a number of social projects. And these require money, where you must go to groups such as the border riders and be able to provide free borders for them. You must go to women groups and provide credit. You must go to people who are in need, pay school fees, barre. You must contribute to medical bills. You must do everything to be seen to be one of them, and then you can return your vote. So in the end, the correlation is that because money is a key determinant of who gets to be elected, normally the people that have money have tended to be elected. But the problem is that people who always have money don't always have akili. You understand? Normally, God gives us talents. You know that by nature, if God gave you akili, He did not necessarily give you money to make akili to make money. That's why the strongest academics in this country are not necessarily the richest. Those who own arcades and fleets of everything are not necessarily, we are not necessarily the most intelligent in the class. And therefore, because election campaigning has become so expensive, the people who have the ability and the capacity to lead have been technically knocked out and locked out of the race. We have now surrendered the electoral arena to those that have money, and these don't necessarily have this, but also they are money-minded and don't care a lot about, delivering services and what everybody thinks. They're quite selfish because they're businessmen, and that's what businessmen do. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Muguzi. And from that, probably, maybe you're saying we shouldn't expect much from the people we elect, because we are not electing people to go and think for us or do things. We are electing people because they are buying the votes or the electorate. But it's really, for me, it's something that is very critical to have a discussion, because the demands continue. When you hear people say the people we are putting into positions are not representing us, what do we want? But also, how do we cut out this money venture in elections and ensure that the people we're putting there may be the smartest to think around service delivery and legislative processes? And I will turn to Ms. Perry. You've worked in the around governance and democracy and the electorate for so long, but also you've had women elected to parliament and other council positions. I don't know how much money you had to spend to get the women into these positions, but if we can also recall 2016, we had the presidential candidate, Maureen Chalia, not pulling out, but taking a break from the campaign process because she ran out of money. And she said it was expensive. She said she needed to go back to London to fundraise. She sought permission from the Electoral Commission and she left the campaign trail for like a month or 6 weeks or something, which shows how hard it is for any individual without probably even a political backing or a huge constituents to stay the course in the election process. You've engaged, like I said, you've worked with women, you've helped women be elected to parliament and all these other platforms. Was it an expensive a process path where you found that money plays a key part? Or, and the other bit of it is that how then, what are the chances for the smart and poor to become leaders in this country?
Thank you, Arnold. Two things. It's important to also know that the amount of money that is spent depends on the level at which you're standing. We know that the MPs spend much more money. There was an opinion poll called the Uganda Governance Pulse, which said that it was released, I think, about a month ago, that MPs spend, when you look at the different strata of candidates, theirs is almost like at 93% in terms of expenditure. For the councillors, it's about 27%. So if you're standing in council or for a council position, you may spend less. Now, it's also important to underscore that there are few elected leaders who have gotten elected not only because of money, but because of the party they stand on, and also because of their close association with the population, and also the fact that the population may also know that they don't have money, but maybe they have worked in that community and there are tangible results in terms of what they have done. Of course, that's a minority, but they are there. That's important. Now, because women have less access to resources due to the way society is structured, you'll find that they will also spend a bit less than the men, except if you are in certain circles, you know, because we also need to know that our politics is based on patronage. There's a lot of clientelism, you know, depending on how much you bow to certain godfathers, you will get money. Of course, it comes at a cost, because that means then the principles and values that you stand for will become secondary. So even if you believe that more money should be allocated to maternal health or to prevention of malaria or other diseases that affect your constituency, because of the way our politics is shaped, that becomes secondary. Your first allegiance is to the patron who ensures that you can get the resources to get reelected. Now, that is why our political system and the way it is structured has a very big effect on service delivery. Because the one who plays the piper calls the tune. In this case, if you belong to NRM, it is going to be the president. That is an open secret. It's open, everyone knows. Okay? For the other parties, it may be different because your leader may not be the one who controls the purse. And because of that, our political parties at times have had a lot of mistrust even within, because you see, they need to access those resources to be able to reach the population and to be able to win. So some of them have been accused of being in bed with the ruling party because they need those resources. And those are most of these are state resources. Because in 2011, just before the election, a lot of money was released. And I remember the Bank of Uganda governor, after the election, actually admitted that the cause of inflation was because money was released into the public just before elections. So that is state money. Now, the question is, if our political system is shaped in such a way that to be able to get access to power, you need money. And you don't question where that money comes from. If you are then elected, particularly into parliament, how are you going to think about health and education, when the one who caused the piper is telling you, no, we need money to buy off opposition. I remember in 2016, after they elected, the president is on record in parliament saying by 2021 there will be no opposition. And we know that most of the way people cross over is being bought. You look at Noop right now, most of the young people who join and make some noise, after some time they'll tell you, I'm crossing over. It's money. Now the question is, our citizens do not really raise a lot of dust when it comes to questioning where this money comes from and why the service delivery remains as is. And now citizens have even got and people wonder why there's a lot of apathy. Apathy is because they sort of know you're not going to deliver services. So they want their returns there and then, you know. And for me, it's saddening that you'll have a few who are actually trying. But because the state is also absent in many of these places, the politicians, the MPs have to fill the gap. That's why you find they have to buy the ambulances, because the state is using money to buy off opposition. So for me, it's the politics. That for me is my argument. The politics has affected service delivery. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Perry. Patronage, political systems that shape the discussion, you know, and ultimately affecting service delivery, like you say. I totally agree. And turning to Isabel, and I'm sorry, I will go back to the young and the youth, because, you know, we have always had, let's say, our leaders mirror society. You know, because the leaders that we elect represent who we are as people. So many times people say it, and sometimes I struggle to believe that. But we are seeing a huge movement now of young people. I think, was it 80% of voters and fall into the bracket of the youth or the young? The challenge, and Perry hinted on it, and where I want to dive in, the citizens as they are, but the young people not holding their leaders accountable, or the people they elect. But we continuously see the young forming. The people power is a youth movement, basically. Or they have created these movements, social movements, who demand a certain kind of representation, but without literally holding the people already there accountable. And the discussion that Perry has kicked off on, which we see there are people that have been elected also without having money, without putting in money. When we're having a discussion with Patrick Kamara, and was mentioning in Fort Portal, the mayor had experience. He campaigned for 2 terms at least, campaigned, told people what he could do, but openly said he doesn't have money. But they also elected him twice and then threw him out because, you know, goodness can last as much at a certain point, but showing that it could be done, especially when people know you and agree with your politics, or you've lived in the community. At the point of the youth, what are we doing wrong? Why is it that the people that are in the current leadership spaces don't mirror, or in a way they mirror, I could be wrong, the majority of the voters, you know, aspirations and perspectives about politics and governance and service delivery? Or have we all fallen into the trap of, let me eat now? What am I gaining now? I know you're not going to do anything once you're a member of parliament or a councillor or what, so give me what I need now. Should we take that route, or is there hope that the youth can change the politics as portrayed by the panelists, to ensure that at least the leaders that we put forward do not stand and say, I'm not your servant, I am here for my family and to eat and get everything that I am supposed to be getting? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arnold. And So those are a lot of questions that you've asked. It's actually more than one question. So I'll attempt to respond to all of them. Do the leaders reflect the people? Do they reflect the people? Yes, there's a level of mirror. Okay, let me take this off. There's a level of mirror, but do they mirror our aspirations? No, I don't think the leadership as we see mirror our aspirations. But it's important that as we are having this conversation, the people that are listening in know that, one, elections are expensive. Like, it's impossible to have a moneyless election. Okay, so money is needed. The question is, what is your money being used for? In a society like Uganda, where we have an electorate that believes that campaigns are a celebration of sorts. They believe that it's a time to dance, it's a time to have processions, it's a time. Those processions cost money. It's probably one of the reasons that you see someone like Anite breaking COVID regulations so that a procession could happen. Processions, like I said, cost money because you need to have a public address system every time you have a procession. There must be drinks, there must be, And so the question is why? If we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the lowest level is the basic needs, that the average person will first aspire to the basic needs before they aspire to self-actualization. Demanding that a poor person pays attention to service delivery and democracy and policies is a good thing. And if they pay attention to it, it's noble. But we must not forget that primarily the average poor person is looking at where their next meal is going to come from. The average poor person is looking at where the money to pay fees for their children is going to come from and where rent is going to come from. And so anyone who attempts to lessen the financial burden on them is a much welcome interruption in their lives. And so elections are a monetary interruption that is very much welcomed by a society like ours that is predominantly poor. But away from that, when we come to the multi-party dispensation in which we operate, look at parties. Look at how other political parties raise finances. And then let's look at how Ugandan political parties raise their money. Under normal circumstances, and really our circumstances are far from normal. Under normal circumstances, party members would contribute greatly to the finances of the institution. So you would have party members, for example, paying membership fees. You would have political parties selling memorabilia. You would have them selling services, or you sell things so that you can raise money. That is absent because a lot of our political parties give out membership cards for free, or even if they sell them, they'll be sold at 1,000 shillings or 2,000 shillings, or at most 5,000 shillings. When I joined a political party, I begged to pay for the membership card. They had given it to me for free, And so that is that's how we operate. And so a lot of the parties are financially poor. They are broke, And so because they are broke, and because people are not putting in money, you have a situation where the burden of any election is on the individual. And if it's on the individual, it means that I will do everything in my power to get this money to be able to go into that position to make more money. Parliament is now a minting house. So if it means that I move from this political party to the other political party to raise 50 million shillings for a post, I will move. Because if I make an investment of 50 million shillings and I have a return on that investment for 5 years, that's a good business deal. It's a good business deal. And so if you look at the average politician, The average politician is investing and expecting a return on investment. It's never about the service delivery. If it's there, it's not something to write home about. It's a little detail to it. And the average citizen, like I said, is looking at who is going to lessen their financial burden. And so, because they know that hospitals will not come, because they know that the investment in education will still remain low, even when you look at the manifestos of the average politician, because I belong to a couple of groups of my village, of my districts, the manifestos are filled with items like, I will provide a fund for school fees for the children in the district. You know, I will make sure that the health center has 20 beds in the first year of my time in parliament. Okay, so when you look at it in that way, the people are also saying, just in case you don't bring the 20 beds, how do I benefit right now? But even when he goes in, it's never about health generally. It's about, if my child is sick, can you send 50,000 shillings for me? If my child happens to die in this health center, can you buy a coffin? So like he said, it's 5 years of financing, which is out of the system of service delivery. Our politicians have developed their own system of service delivery, which is independent of the normal recognized system by the government. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Isabel. And it kind of reminded me of when we were in Luka district sometime last year, dealing with issues to do with human rights violations and abuses within the sugar industry, and we talked to the RDC, who said every day 90% of cases he deals with are related with child labor, with land conflicts. We went to the LC5 chairman and says, but the district could even pass bylaws against this, because it's really people that have engaged with the sugar industry or outgrowers know the level of land conflicts, domestic violence, child labor is really high. And the LC5 openly told us they have tried, but now he has to be very careful, because he was warned by the companies involved that they will sponsor his opponent next electoral cycle. So he said, I'm trying, but they are going to sponsor my opponent. So like I said, you choose very carefully how far. But I said, your role as LC5 chairman, as the local government, you have to do this and this and this. But it says, it's not about the roles anymore. It's about, how they say politicians, number one, task is to be elected. Number two is to be re-elected. All the other things, and much as you're saying, of all these other things are secondary. But also, and Perry had hinted on issues around values and what the legitimacy of you being in office is not about what you're doing. It's about who you're serving and what their interests are. We have seen situations where governments have done everything possible to get somebody out of parliament because they don't serve their purpose. And it's really, it affects in essence, because there's so many times people say, but that person has been working. Why were they not re-elected? We have also gone to places or areas where, and this is jumping into the discussion around service delivery, where people are going to be elected because they say, that person buries. They always bury. They attend our weddings, they bury. When my child was sick, they brand, we're looking at politicians as a brand. If you're not burying, if you're not attending wedding, contributing, not just actually burying and wedding, contributing, the electorate just say, that person has done nothing for us. Because, and where your last point was made, Isabel, where the political system has totally changed. Accountability is not from the angle of what you're supposed to be doing, but what your constituents expects you to do. And I'll go back to Henry around this discussion. How do we deal with it? If leaders that we are electing are not going to lead, they are not going to offer services or work around their mandate to ensure that services come closer to the people. But we're spending a lot of money to get them into positions to lead and over service. How do we address that from your engagement? And I know you've written and made recommendations that sometimes people look at and say, but this can never work. One, how do we manage money in politics? But also, how do we make sure that the process addresses the need that is intended to lead, to offer service?
Thank you very much, Arnold. Let me start like this. Over the past two electoral cycles, and I'm referring to 2011 and 2016, every time we have completed an electoral cycle, the national gross domestic product, the GDP, has dipped. In 2011, it dipped from 6.2% to 2.8. In 2016, it dipped from 6.3% to 3.2. It was just beginning to regain in 2018 at 6% when COVID came in. The thing is this: the reason the GDP goes down is that money gets to be diverted from productive sectors, and one of these is service delivery. You have, and Perry alluded to it, a situation where the hands of the technocracy in the macroeconomic institutions get to be twisted to finance elections. Governor Mutevile has testified to some of these things. But also you have people getting away from engaging in productive economic activity to target and chase free money that is available from candidates and political parties participating in the election. But beyond that, you have at the local government level, like you've alluded to, there are these men and women who are in the business of winning contracts from districts that get to bankroll candidates that win the elections. The reason they bankroll them is so that when they get to be elected, they ensure that the contracts available get to be diverted. They get to be directed to the financiers. And they've been so crafty that if I supported a candidate in Luka district and he goes through, then that candidate must make sure that they liaise with another candidate in Luengo, so that if I supported a candidate in Luka, I win the contracts of Luengo, and the one of Luengo wins these ones, so that these ones who are chasing the thieves can't find me. But every time they will get, and remember, it's at the local government level where we deliver services to the Muntu Awansi. And so when they get these contracts, they don't actually deliver the services. They deliver very shortly and substandard services because they must recoup with the profit what they invested. But also, beyond that, the corruption that is so endemic in Uganda, people don't engage in corruption just because they must enrich themselves. They engage in corruption, and the corruption has persisted because proceeds from that corruption finds its way into financing elections. And the elections must be financed because the only way a sitting government in this country can be re-elected is by use of money. And some of this money has to come from corruption because they need a lot of it, but also because to keep those patronage networks we talked about happy, they must be fed on corruption. And so what suffers, at the end of the day, it is service delivery that suffers. At the grassroots level, the people who are contracted to deliver services have to recoup their money and therefore they deliver half the service. At the national level, the national resources get to be diverted. Some of it is stolen by the corrupt people. They don't deliver 100%, they deliver 20%, so that the rest can find its way into financing elections. And in this country, a party in power cannot be re-elected on the basis of service delivery because there is none of it at all on the ground. It's only money, which is why I started by saying, do you think if you remove the money from the picture, can the NRM be elected? I think it won't. even after 35 years. It's the money that must ensure the vote. But the question you asked is, how do we get out of here? I think it's important. We are faced with a catch-22 situation. First of all, we have a very poor electorate, where the basic needs of survival, she talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A person cannot think about ideas when they are hungry. And therefore, if there's someone who is providing something, they would rather go for that money than actually consider the ideas, which is why little wonder, therefore, that the politicians always say that the Ugandan electorate does not understand ideas, they understand money. And therefore, I think we need to do some civic engagement of sorts. I don't know. It's important that we get to improve the living conditions of the people. I don't know whether this is possible in the current circumstances, but above all, I think we need legislation. Legislation that can regulate campaign spending, because you see, in the current circumstances, the best way we can do is to deal with the supply lines. If we have legislation that cuts off the supply lines for overspending in campaigns, then we would be able to lower the cost of campaigning, and then kind of have a semblance of a level playing field that can attract people of quality, people of sense, people of substance that can get there and get to do something. I think those are the things we can do. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Leveling the playing field, regulating the use of money. But I think, the parliamentary, the legislation that actually talks about bribery, giving money. I sometimes I actually feels like one of those provisions that is useless, because bribery it's bribery. It's everyday bribery in elections in one way or the other, the way you look at it, because it's intended to influence how somebody votes, but also totally, discredit the opponent in one way or the other. And I'll turn to Perry. I know money. Sometimes people have actually said there's no way we're going to cut money out of the system. Is there a way we can educate the electorate, the voters, to say you can eat the money and vote issues? How do we, get people to say, just because we are not all that Christians to say that I ate somebody's money, I have to vote for them. Lining up, yo.
No, that's where the ATMs were.
The problem.
Open
So
ATMs.
how do we ensure that people can actually say, yeah, this person gave you money, but I don't need to vote. I need to vote issues, because I can't for 5 years continuously complain about service delivery and keep putting people that are not going to deliver that service. How do I say thank you? Maybe it's reparation for everything you didn't do, but I'm going to vote for this person because they are going to. Because so many times we don't change anything but continue complaining. How do we get the electorate, the voters, to partake on the share they were entitled to in service delivery, but also now bought on issues they want to see addressed by their leaders?
Thank you, Arnold. Two things. I think it's important to expose the electorate to leaders who have delivered services, even in this context. I'll give you two districts, Gulu and Kabarole. Those two leaders are quite unique, the current LC5 chairpersons. They have actually tried, within the circumstances of decentralization, to improve roads, to improve at least access to the bare minimum of services. Because I think they have understood what leadership means. And that's why if you look at the scorecard, the local government scorecard by Accord, over the 5 or so years, those two LC5s have always emerged among the best 5. There's something different they're doing. And I really hope they would get national attention in terms of exposure, not only on TV, but on radio, for people to see that it is possible to lead differently in this country. I have been to those two districts. As an organization, we took a number of leaders from some of the districts where we work to Kabarole, just to go and listen, to go and see what do these leaders do that is different. Why have they been able to deliver some semblance of services in a context of decentralization where resources are so centralized, and yet you're supposed to do your role as the local leader? You know, so exposure, very important, but also the tools that we use for exposure. You know, maybe the on-site visits, the national attention on TV, on radio, so that people see that it is possible to have leaders who focus on issues and actually care about the people. The second is we
Maybe
must...
on that,
Yeah,
and
sure.
sorry to cut you short on the exposure, but we have also seen situations in this country that once you're overexposed, the system wants you out because you're becoming too powerful. Everybody is talking about you, and sometimes people have tried to limit how they portray themselves because after 35 years, we can't have too many powerful people. Then there's a problem. How do we then, we have seen in situations where, the system will literally kick you out for doing what you're supposed to be doing and for people who are talking about you all the time.
Exactly, and we're dealing with a case right now of the EOC chairperson. I will talk about that in a different perspective. But we have done some work in communities. I remember in 2011, just before the election, we had an LC3 chairperson in a sub-county called Kochi. It's in Yumbe. This particular area did not have enough homes building toilets. 2011, we're still dealing with people who don't see the importance of having a toilet in your home. And they were using the toilet of the sub-county health center. So what this man did, after a lot of talking and village meetings, we told them you have to pass a bylaw because otherwise your health budget, which is actually not there, you're going to have problems, cholera and all these things that come with poor hygiene. So he decided to set for himself a goal and said, you know what, whether I'm re-elected or not, I think this is good for the community. They passed a bylaw and they started implementing the bylaw. And guess what? The population, as he and his team were implementing, they told him, we'll not re-elect you. How can you tell us to construct toilets in our homes? This is Uganda at 2011. Funnily enough, I think when they started seeing the incident of disease coming low, they re-elected him. So at times, leaders have to take chances and say, let me do the right thing. And let me leave when there's some mark I have made. And that's a personal decision a leader needs to make. What do I want to be known for long after I'm gone? You talk about people like the LC5 of Gulu and Kabarole, they will be known long after they are gone, So for me, that's a personal decision that leaders have to make. But the second thing is we must pursue election petitions. Do you know how Mwanga Chivumbi got into parliament in 2011? His petition actually stood on bribery. That's why the court overturned the election of, was he Faizo Chikulukunyu, I think, yes. That's how Mwanga Chivumbi got into parliament. So it's not all lost, but at times we feel so hopeless, that bribery is actually an offense. And if you're able to prove before a court of law that this is the evidence I have, those elections can be overturned. And we have seen that happen. So leaders have a role to play. That's what I'm saying. That those who are going into this politics have a role to play in changing what we don't want. So for me, those would be the two things. The last one is continue to educate. When you continue to say something over and over again, it takes root. So we must invest, and not only us as civil society. The role of civic education is the role of the government through the Uganda Human Rights Commission. So how much money does the Uganda Human Rights Commission get to do this work? What is it doing? We must be able to continue to push back so that we are complementing its role and not taking over its role as civil society. That's where I would stop in terms of the 3 recommendations. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Perry, on that. And civic education, Mr. Ogarama on that, and elections management and civic. We have seen, and much as they say, the role of the Uganda Human Rights Commission in this, but also the role of civil society and different parties. I remember 2016, because when time we're dealing with Human Rights Watch and did a lot of study on some of these. And it's shocking because civic education is, can also lead you in prison in this country. You're letting people know so much. we were dealing with situations where we went across the country and we found people with money. We don't know, the party with money would buy airtime on all radio stations and tell them, play music. When the opposition comes and say, oh, we need to pay for 2 hours slot on this topic, say, unfortunately, we are full. We are fully booked. And during that time, they will play music because somebody paid the money. And that's when we come up with a report, keeping the people uninformed, because it's really, it's sometimes like you look at the way we are dealing with politics in this country, and sometimes it's a catch-20, like you can't win. And the people, access to information, even understanding their, the powers the electorate has is a huge task, because you don't have access to media platforms. Now we are dealing with scientific elections, or it's very expensive to even do it. But even in some areas, so many times people concentrate in Kampala and we believe, oh, the opposition is talking everywhere. But there are places where politicians cannot even access a platform to say what they are going to do. And that's why I turned to Rugarama in one of these, in this area, elections management, civic education. How do we deal with such an issue where you cannot convene, you cannot hold a rally anymore? Because we have had situations where before the decision in the POMA bill says, you need to get permission from the police, even when the law was not talking about permission, it was talking about informing. But we know everybody was stopped from holding for whatever purpose. Now we are dealing with situations where the people with money will buy airtime, if I can call it that, off all media platforms. And now, as if that is not bad enough, the UCCA says now, if you want to broadcast on your phone, social media platforms, Facebook Live or something, you need to inform us. They don't say, they say inform. Or register with us so that we, authorization, that's the word. Where does that leave the common person who is saying, I know I need to educate my electorate, I need to tell them what I want to do, I need to inform them of the failures of the current, their current leader. How do we manage situations of civic education in an environment that is very hostile around educating people?
Thank you. You see, comrades, this thing called civic education is such a huge concept that we either know it and do not want to implement it, or we simply don't appreciate it. And all these issues that we are discussing, the honorable ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues, they all rotate majorly around inadequate civic awareness. The Electoral Commission, where I worked for a good number of years, is legally empowered to do vote education, not civic education. My sister here, Perry, talked about civic education, and I think Uganda Human Rights is the one mandated to do that. But even then, Uganda Human Rights has not done what it is legally mandated to do. Not that it does not have capacity in terms of the human resource, but they have got other limitations. Voter education, which Electoral Commission has been doing for a number of years, with due respect, is also not adequately done. Otherwise, the explanation you have in spoiled ballot papers all goes to voter education. That the electorate, the voters, are not educated enough. And you see, the numbers have been increasing. That is what is disturbing. Because you would say, these people we have had about 10 elections, if I'm not mistaken, 10 elections in the what you would call election in this country. And the numbers of spoiled ballot papers, the numbers keep increasing. I was looking at, I sent a small text message to my sister Diana here, even at Makerere University when they had their elections. Some ballot papers were spoiled. I was like, this is in an atmosphere of 100% literacy. For heaven's sake, what happened? So there is the challenge of civic education, which Arnold you have asked, and I want to respond to it in this way. That civic education is a whole idea of getting a population aware that for service delivery to happen, we must have leaders whom we have microscopically examined, and we have come to a conclusion that these ones are going to agitate for our rights, and the rights cut across, and therefore the issues of medicines in hospitals and health centers, education, availability of teachers, infrastructure, the schools, the roads. Because when you tell me that an MP is providing an ambulance, I mean, that in itself is a big problem. Because I'm not saying that the MPs should take back their ambulances. That is, again, complicating the situation. But you see, whose mandate is it to provide ambulances? Medicines in hospitals. The hospital themselves being either constructed or renovated. Beds. So let me conclude on this, that civic education, if it was implemented in its, even if it was, not even, I wouldn't say in its totality, because that is a big thing at the same time. But if there was a political will to implement civic education, then we would be having issues of less on the campaign financing, if any, and highly regulated, legally speaking, but at the same time would be having high scores on delivery from those who have been given the mandate to deliver.
All right. Thanks a lot. And I know we're getting caught up with time, and yet I really needed to have some questions from the participants or comments. So I need about 4 hands. If anybody has comments or questions for the panelists, we'll take only 4 of them. But as the people prepare, I'll turn to Isabel. On the role, what role can actually civil society or even opposition political actors do around civic education? Because if the government is failing, or the different institutions mandated to do voter education, but also civic education are failing, is there a place for us as citizens in our different movements, in our different spaces, to say, you know what, we need to take this on and educate the electorate and build their capacities around elections, and all geared towards addressing some of the ills that we have had discussions on, you know, the skewed priorities in values and service delivery. What do we do around civic education? Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that I usually ask is, at what age does the average Ugandan citizen first interact with civic education? Because there's a lot of bombardment of all this information when people turn 18. And at 18, you're a bent tree. Any attempt to straighten you breaks you, you're skewed. And yet we also know that, for example, the national elections are reflected in all other little elections that happen. Elections that happen in primary schools, elections that happen at secondary school level. There's a time I was going to Masaka and I saw a child in a car waving. And I was like, why are you even out of school campaigning on the main road? You know, the people out on the main road are not even your voters. Why don't you just stay in school and, convince people from there? But probably the child asked the parents to get a car because they see that moving in a car and waving is the norm and you get clout. And so it's important that civics as a subject comes back. Okay, it needs to come back. This elimination of civics was a big blunder. It's one of the biggest blunders of our generation that civics was kicked out of the curriculum. It needs to come back, that there must be age-appropriate content on civic education to every citizen of this country. From nursery, there must be something and it keeps increasing as you go on. So that's the first thing, that if you're an advocacy organization and governance is part of your core work, you must be interested in getting civics back into the curriculum. The second one is there was an interesting study that was done by the Aga Khan University on the perceptions of Ugandans. It's interesting because it has interesting findings, but one of them is that Ugandans are highly religious, okay? So they are either in the church, in the mosque, at the witch doctor, they are somewhere or at all, okay? And yes, the reason I added the traditional healers and the witches is because they also go to both. Someone will go to church with the same energy with which they go to the witch on Thursday. So so it's important that if we are talking about civic education and we are talking about election financing, that we cannot escape the people that Ugandans listen to. And I know that religious leaders have decided to just go around the subject of governance. But for those of you who are religious in any of those spaces, I think it's important that you begin to quote for them scripture that encourages them to actually pay attention to governance. If you are Christian, there's a lot of scripture that backs involvement in governance discourses and political conversations for anyone. If you are Muslim, I haven't read the Quran extensively, but I believe that there are parts where you're encouraged to take part in the governance conversations of your land. I don't know what we shall tell the witches, but there must be something that we are able to tell those people. Yeah. And then the third one, the third issue comes to, it's around the law and the rights of the people. And I saw Dr. Daniel, he speaks so passionately about this. So I'll contextualize it. He will come and give it the legal, the legal, yes, because some of us are being chased off the panel. I would have asked Perry. But in the last election, there were two money lenders who went and petitioned the speaker of money lenders. The two, they went and spoke on behalf of their fellow money lenders, and were petitioning the speaker because they had 1.5 billion shillings unreturned from MPs. And they were petitioning and asking the speaker to please ask her members to pay them. Yeah. Ugandans need to be educated enough to sue people like this. If more MPs knew that there was a chance that they would be taken to the courts of law and they would end up behind bars, maybe their desire to go and borrow such humongous sums of money to facilitate elections would be controlled. Because 1.5 billion from two money lenders. Now, if we decided to get the entire money lending association, what would happen? And when you talk about the impact on businesses. These are people's businesses.
Yeah.
So if you have all this money tied up by this small group of people because they want to consolidate sitting, then it's problematic. So those
Okay.
are my proposals.
Thank you very much, Acteng. Yeah, and that reminded me of what was her name, the MP in Nyakato, somebody who served jail term for failing to pay loan for the elections. But I think it's something that take on. So the questions, we really have about 10 minutes to have the questions and then wrap up because there's another panel. Diana's hand was up. I see Harriet's hand. Then Florence. Yes, those are 3 questions. And then Joel. I will take yes, Joseph, help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kwesiga. And thank you very much, the panelists, for a very great presentation. My question, I think, will be directed to Perry. When we're talking about accountability and the role of you gave an example of the local government scorecard. As a voter, every year towards the end of Parliament, I look out to newspaper articles. There's a particular newspaper that ranks the performance of MPs. I somehow believe in the authenticity of that newspaper. I never question its authenticity, but I critically look at it to see how my MPs or the leaders in my, in my constituencies are performing. And for me, it greatly, I think it greatly affects my decision. I think I would still vote, and I actually know that good performers, even when they are not in the parties that I support, I would personally vote someone, even if they were in a party that I don't support, if they appeared in that paper as people who have really performed. Unfortunately, my constituency, my member of parliament is consistently among the worst performers, and he's a minister consistently. But you find that this information in the constituency means nothing. I don't even know whether it's even known. So I was looking at, my question to you is there a way in which civil society can amplify such efforts? The media has given you, they've done research and they've given you a report card. This is how your MPs have performed. Why don't we bump on that report card and ensure that everyone at the grassroots is able to actually understand why, why you should not vote the way you're voting? Thank you so much.
Mine is a comment, and it's not going to be less than a minute because I represent a category that hasn't been talked about here. Thank you very much, the presenters, panelists, and the chair for this wonderful presentation. Mine is going to be a little bit different. My name is Florence Ndagir, and I'm a lawyer and a PhD student. I'm looking at the role that civil society can play. It's very important for us to know that most of the voters are school dropouts and they do not even understand the laws. All they need is money on their table to have something to eat, forgetting the service delivery. But I'm saying that we can set the agenda, mobilize the community, and sensitize them about the existing issues that we need to work on in the 5 years to come, and then make sure that we ask these leaders to be accountable to us. I think that's when we'll get service delivery forward. I have had one of our representative, member of parliament representing persons with disabilities, who said that he financed his elections, he paid for his elections, so he will not be accountable to us because he paid money for those voters to vote for him. So for how long are we going to keep with those leaders? We need to vote them out by ensuring that the community understands the challenges of that need service delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnold. I'll start by having a comment over Perry's statements. Perry, you were wondering if the electorate knows where the funding comes from. The truth is, we really know where the money comes from. And it's so painful, it's so disheartening that these are funds that come from the taxes that we pay after hard labor. We know where the money comes from. The problem, though, is that even when we try to talk about it, even when we try to go to court, the institutions are compromised. The problem is the apple does not fall far from the apple tree. I have a case that I know in mind where there was, in fact, it was a TV talk show where one LC5 aspirant, it was from Buike district, was complaining that even when there was no voting on some polling stations, results were declared from that same polling station. And he was wondering how he had gotten 9 votes and his incumbent gotten 400 votes plus, yet there was no voting. So as Henry said, Akili, I laughed at that. It is the problem that we have today. I have also seen an MP in Buike district, that one I'll be bold to say, Dr. Lulume, he has the brains. But because he does not have the money today, he is not on ground. He keeps coming to the ground and people know him and love him, but they keep saying, kitu kidogo, please, kitu kidogo. And because of kitu kidogo, he cannot do anything else. So we end up with mediocrity, with little stuff, shoddy work on ground every other time. Henry was also asked how we could manage political funding. And I said, I feel we cannot do much. Why? There are so many political pronouncements that are threatening, especially to the opposition. People fear for their lives. People fear to say this or that. So the only thing that a person does is to remain cocooned in their homes and let fate go its way. Cry, my beloved country.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. My question is directed particularly to Mr. Kiteng and Mr. Muguzi. You mentioned that this whole thing seems like a business, right? And that if it's a business, there's a need being identified and that business is meeting that need. So my question is in as regards who we are as a people, as an African people. When people say that they are happy that, oh, somebody came and buried with them or, did something of the sort, there's a sense of understanding that there are values that they hold dear to them as a community, and that could it be argued that in some way those values, those things that are being seen as important are met during the times of elections or with just money? That could it be that if he came and saw me when I was sick in the hospital, that is enough? That when I think political accountability, then I'm happy because he showed up. Could it be that the values of us as Africans and as Ugandans are what is informing political accountability? That we don't see the need for more? Could it be argued that that is true?
Thank you very much. And I know we are caught up with time, so I'll just jump into the questions that were presented. As you answer the question that was presented to you, also give your closing remark on the subject.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Yes, the values play a very huge role on what the people will hold their MPs accountable to. 2 of my MPs, one mingles at every funeral. Like every time someone dies, he goes to mingle. That's what got him into parliament the first time. He lost the primaries, but the people said, oh, you are mingler of ATAP, come back. So he's standing as an independent. So yes, I agree. And then there's another one, the woman MP, and there's a joke in the village that during election season, she never gets off her knees. Like everywhere she goes, so that's respect. The MP honors us. So yes, I hear. But then I also know that every time you attempt to have a conversation around the roles of MPs, they don't want to have a conversation around what the stipulated role of an MP is. So this business of legislation, take your things away. For us, the MP stands with us, mourns with us. So yes, I hear you. But again, that is why civic education is important, because culture is not static. It evolves. And so it's important that we normalize the conversations around service delivery. We normalize the conversations around election financing, the pros, the cons, so that a new culture can be born out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll pick it up from, and I'll speak about only two things. Number one is I will start where she stops. Culture evolves. The people who are in this territory have not just migrated into this territory. They were here in 1980. They voted not money, but the issues. They were here in 1993 Constituency Assembly. They voted issues. They were also here in 1996. Many of them did not vote money. And therefore, I think we have not followed through with the changes in generations, because today we are faced with a situation where the electorate sometimes stands against one of their very own. Those of us who monitored village elections, we saw that the moment one declared themselves to stand as candidate for LC1, the electorate the fellow villagers turned against them and started braying. So there is a way in which the electorate thinks that when people go to occupy those positions, they get to eat, they get to loot, and therefore, for as long as you can come and share with us that route, then you can go with it. But lastly, I think in terms of civic education, if we can succeed in enabling or empowering these voters to make a connection or a link between the ballot, campaign spending, the corruption that is eating away everything, accountability, okay, then they will be able to attach value. Because for now, election time is like an outing. When you ask them, why is it that you behave differently on village elections and the local government elections and differently on MP and presidential, they say the other one is an outing, the other one is a game. And therefore, we need to get these citizens to understand that this is not a game. Because, of course, when we talk also about civic education, I ask myself a question: who stands to benefit from a civically incompetent citizenry, and who would lose when the citizenry is competent?
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, Perry also had a number of questions, so we'll go to Perry and your closing remarks, then we'll turn to Daniel for his final remarks.
Okay, thank you. Dan asked about the local government scorecard and also the annual parliament and how we can popularize it. Two things, because I know what a code does, partly because one of the districts where code is as an organization, we are also there. After they have released the scorecard, they do a lot of community engagements to inform people about how the scorecard is arrived at, the findings, and what it means for leadership and service delivery. But these are long-term programs. It can't be 2 years, 3 years. No, it has to be long-term and consistent in those communities, because once you keep saying the same thing, with time, citizens' mindset and behavior also changes. The other is to, apart from the community engagements, there are also radio programs. They look at what are the platforms that citizens listen to, the timing, so that they're able to bring these leaders at different intervals to explain, you performed badly, why, what were the issues, so that way the leaders know that they're being held accountable for their mandate. And that's why if you look at some of the districts, there's leadership changes. After some time, the population says, no, you're out, we want someone new because you've not performed. But it's long-term and consistent. The other, which came from my sister, Buikwe, one of the things I know is that we can only change what we don't like by participating. And that's why if you identify a good candidate, what kind of support are you giving this candidate? You've mentioned money. How many are you mobilizing to give that candidate money? How many are you mobilizing to go and speak to the electorate about the importance of this good candidate vis-a-vis the other one who is just splashing money like an ATM machine? So it takes work, Sitting doesn't change things. We must invest in this. Find out this kind of candidates, map them in our areas, find out the support that they need, and actually, the Waganda say, we have to do that. If that is what it takes. If it takes going and giving media space, going and talking about these candidates, we must do that. And I've always said, we are not partisan, we are just political. because the politics affects us. So we must make our population understand that. So I'll end by saying that our political system has a very big implication on service delivery in this country. And as long as our citizenry does not get that, we'll continue to have this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Perry. And Daniel?
Yes, just let me just add my voice really. If we must get this thing right, we need to increase on civic awareness. Civic awareness is the way to go. The moment we get it right, in which case the subset of voter education is also improved, then we shall be in a very comfortable sitting position. Two, there is great need for political willingness. The sitting government must not pay lip service and other related agencies. Three, my sister was talking about the scorecard, my friend. That one is very good for us, the elites, but somebody down there, he wishes to see who has buried, who has attended the wedding, who has paid school fees. But still, all hope is not lost. We can further emphasize that who has been scored highest is the best by going down to the local areas and preaching the gospel. We need also to look at the legal framework, strengthen, especially strengthening the framework, the legal framework around which campaign funding for financing is concerned. And finally, we have to look at these issues as our own problems. These are our own issues, and we must provide homegrown solutions. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. Thanks a lot, Perry. Thanks a lot, Ms. Akiteng, and thanks very much, Henry, for this discussion. I know time has not been on our side. I will not attempt to, to kind of re-echo the discussions that have been had, but taking away or closing this, we are all political. We need to get involved. I always tell people, you've had discussions, people say, I'm not a politician, I'm not interested. And I always tell them, just because you don't care about politics doesn't mean politics doesn't care about you. Everything that is done is political. And whether you say you're not a politician or not interested, it still affects you in one way or the other. And the clearest or the most direct route is around service delivery. So thank you very much. Please give my panelists a hand of, clap. And thanks for also listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arnold, and the participants. We'll now have to get our tea, but it will be a working tea because time has been fast spent. So we'll use these 10 minutes to get the tea, get back to our seats, and then we'll kick off with a second panel. Yes, we'll have a working tea as the professor is already the first to get the tea because he's the moderator of the next panel. Okay, thank you.
was that, elections are useless in this country. I may be exaggerating, but that's what he meant. That we should we cannot have elections that are meaningful and that give rise to democratically elected leaders. Other members of the panel were a bit optimistic, saying, we could still fix our problems in the electoral system. Yes, as much as elections have been are based on money is exchanging hands, but we can change this. And the premise of that was that we can actually change this by promoting civic awareness. That has come up again this morning. So that's the kind of debate that we are having today. And I'm going to ask each panelist to just say something in a minute or two, opening remarks, then we can move to discussing very specific questions. Thank you. I'll start with Irene. We have sanitizers just to be sure we are following SOPs. I would advise that before you move the mic to another person, please sanitize the mic to avoid a passing on corona. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mbazira. So when I was looking at the title of the panel, I think for me the first thing that stood out was the idea of promoting accountability for electoral promises, because you can only promote accountability for electoral promises. It's extremely difficult to try and enforce accountability for promises. So if a politician comes and says, if you vote me, I am going to take us from lower income to middle income status, so I'm going to make us super rich as a country. Or once you vote me, there'll be 5 boreholes within, every 5-kilometer distance. Those are the promises that they make to make sure you vote them. But the nature of the promise is that it's not a contract per se, and therefore you cannot enforce it. Now, how you would enforce it would ideally be to go to court. But election promises are not things that you can enforce, mainly for 2 or 3 reasons. First is the way that the legal system is set up. So if a politician comes and makes a promise, it's very difficult for you as a citizen to, for example, go and petition court and say that this MP promised that he would take my child to school and he did not enforce that promise. Because the way the legal system is set up is that there's a concept of separation of power, which means that for the judiciary to come in and enforce a contract between a politician and a voter would mean that they're overstepping their mandate, because their mandate around the law is to only interpret it. Yeah? So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that if you're trying to describe it as a contract, how do you define who the parties are? So on the one side, you know who the politician is, but the parties would have to be all the voters in that particular constituency or all the voters in the country, right? And so there's a lot of trouble trying to identify how would you exactly define who the other party to that contract would be. The other aspect that around enforcing promises from politicians is that if we are suing politicians, let's at least sue them under fair trade policies. Now, fair trade policies really argue that if 2 parties to a contract, principally, you're supposed to avoid misleading or deceiving. So if you enter a contract with someone who makes juice, for example, if they promise that the juice can heal COVID or will give immunity against COVID, and you take that juice and you die of COVID or you contract COVID, you can go and sue that party for breach of contract under fair trade, right? But as a politician who comes and promises to build a school or to change a particular system if you vote them, you cannot go and sue them in court for violating a fair trade policy, because politicians are not really, they don't engage in trade or commerce. So legally, it's a very tricky subject when you're looking at what do you do with politicians and how do we enforce their rights. And so it moves, the conversation, the debate has had to move away from trying to enforce promises to promote. So how do we encourage? How do we get them to make sure that when they make a promise, they can keep it? And it comes back to the issue that Perry in the earlier panel was speaking about, which is that because of the frustration over failure to enforce promises, there's a lot of voter apathy. And so then the situation comes to how do we start to figure out how to promote accountability by politicians? The easiest route to promote it, obviously, in the only system or the easiest system that's formally set up is elections. When you look at Uganda pre-1986, we had military governments. And so it was very hard for you to enforce any promises because of the nature of that system. Under multi-party democracy, you have largely two avenues to try and promote accountability. One is elections. So if citizens are given a chance to vote, when you come back, ideally, the voter should say, you know, you made a number of these promises, you didn't keep that promise, and therefore I'm not going to vote you. And you can see that playing out in Ugandan elections, but especially at parliament and lower local government elections. An example is that in the last election of 345 MPs, 200 of them did not come back in the 2016 election. So 200 MPs were new in the last election. And so you can see that playing out in the lower local government elections where people are challenging their leaders and saying, you know, you made certain promises, but you didn't keep it. When you look at it at a national level, so for example, from a political party angle or from a presidential angle, it becomes a bit trickier or more difficult to enforce promises. If you're looking at it at a party level, ideally, the system is that parliament should create a process where the opposition is able to hold the leading or the ruling party accountable. Now, the challenge in Uganda is that because the ruling party has up to over 70% majority, it becomes very difficult for the system to facilitate that level of accountability. And so you can see frustrations in, I think the most vivid example was in September 2017, during the debate on the age limits, where you get so frustrated that a fight breaks out in parliament because you find that the system does not support a process where people can hold the party accountable to a constitution they themselves introduced. And so those are the two mechanisms, ideally. And I guess maybe that's where I'll start, and then we can discuss later how the promotion goes.
Thank you, Irene. Ivan? Okay, she's sanitizing the microphone. SOPs.
Thank you very much. In politics and in electoral processes, you cannot detach promises. Promises are a critical component of any campaign process. What sets it apart is who is making the promise, and can they be held at their word that they will likely fulfill the promise they've made. We have those that fulfill their promises in the campaign cycles, but we have those that are certified liars. We also have those that make promises that are completely one out of their mandate, but surely for any reasonable person they cannot fulfill. But for any politician sober enough and being truthful about the promises they make, they must fulfill them in accordance to their mandate. And it goes to institutions then. Because any politician who promises, let's say, the issue of infrastructure, I've had many MPs saying, I'll make sure that this road is constructed. But when you track back, the process of even having the road in the budget and making sure that that road is constructed is an institutional matter. What I'm saying is the best way to promote accountability of electoral processes is by cleaning up our institutions. Because when we clean up our institutions, then it becomes much better to fulfill promises. And I was arguing the other day that the way our political parties are structured, even at the national level, we cannot fulfill the promises because political parties are disorganized at all levels. That political leaders leading those political parties make promises they cannot fulfill. But also political parties come up with manifestos that they don't fulfill. We have had a lot of times when it comes to the current manifesto, the person takes us back to 1986. In short, we have failed to graduate from the 1986 Bush mentality. Yet, a promise is more in the future. So we need to think deep about our institutions at a political party level and at the level of governance. The way, for example, I will give an example quickly, that the way the parliament is structured today, it is at your own risk that you believe what they say. Because even the slightest of debate on matters of policy cannot be effective because of the numbers, because of the bureaucratic tendencies, and the quality of the leaders that are there.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivan. Doreen? Yeah, that's good. You insist the speaker before you sanitizes the microphone.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you so much, moderator. Now, in my view, today's topic is too academic. In my view, today's topic is for democracy. It's not for a military dictatorship like the one we have in Uganda. And for that matter, you'll allow me discuss the topic as is and not as how it ought to be. The concept sent to us talks about a constitution. It also talks about people power. And yet when you look at Uganda, none of the two seems to make sense to me. For one to have accountability, the electoral process ought to be free and fair. If you win an election because of the will of the people, definitely respect the people. If you win an election because of bullets, you'll definitely respect the gun. If you win an election because you have bribed, you'll definitely respect the money. And we all know that in Uganda, bullets have delivered more leaders than the ballot. And to also emphasize what I'm talking about, military despots don't organize elections to empower their citizens. They don't organize elections to empower people. They organize elections so as to get some form of legitimacy. They organize elections so that to rule and lead with minimal opposition. And I think that is what is happening in Uganda. That we have roads, for example, for a very long time, Bunyoro was a very hard to reach area. There were no roads, there were hardly any hospitals. But because dictators want to aid, they are looting and they are stealing, they have to put infrastructure in place. If you go to Bunyoro today, you'll find a behavior of activities. You'll find that roads have now been constructed. You'll find that there's some improvement on infrastructure, and we all know why that is happening. It's because there is oil. And I can take you back to the colonialists. When they constructed a railway, it's not that they wanted us to move freely. No, they constructed the railway because they wanted to go to Busoga and steal our oil. They constructed the railway because they wanted to go to Koboko and steal our cotton. They constructed the railway because they wanted to go to Chirembe and steal copper. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Professor. and for the organizers who've given us this opportunity to interface on these matters. Yes, some academic, others political. I'll just make maybe two statements. The first one will be in form of a question to those who are listening in. How many of us here remember the promise your member of parliament made to you? Or do you know who your member of parliament is? Huh? How many? How many? Like, I know my member of parliament. All right? You know, but you get the point. How we very few of us know what promises they made to us. That is point number one. And that is buttressed by the fact that I would like to agree with Irene that in a way, the electoral promise is not being made in the first place because it is not being communicated. And because it is not communicated, there is no way we can hold you accountable for something you have not said. I'll be honest with you, in many cases, some of us vote because we just like the political party or we just like the person. You know, Nyanjura is a lady. She's been a decent person. I've seen her posters around. I've never had any problem with her. She's never abused me. When I go to vote, I'll vote for her. Now, has she made a promise? No. At least if she has made them, I don't know them. Right? So that is the first point I should make. Secondly, I just want to quote a statement I picked from the 2016 manifesto of the NRM, signed by the chairperson and the candidate at the time, so that you can see where I'm coming from. It says, he says so many things, and I choose only him. We can't talk about everyone, but I choose just this one. It says, it is a right of every Ugandan to understand what their government intends to accomplish so that they are not only able to demand for accountability, as well as efficient and effective service delivery, but also participate in the pursuit of those goals. It is a right to understand. Now, my question to us is, how many do you think Ugandan voters understand this manifesto? Has it even been translated into our local languages? Because the assumption that you and I speak English and therefore everyone in our village speaks English and therefore we know the contents of the promises and the manifesto is totally a huge misnomer. Those are the two statements I'll make for now.
Okay.
Thanks, Prof.
Hold the microphone still. I have a question for you in relation to what you've said, especially the last point. You are part of the class of the elite. Yes. We cannot deny that I am. So many people here are. What has been the role of the elite in promoting political accountability? Do we simply see the elite on social media? Do we see the elite on ground? The elite playing their rightful role in promoting political accountability?
Prof, I'll be honest with you. I think we have done a disservice to the nation as the elites, those who apparently know or are supposed to know. I think we've done a disservice. Apart from conversations in these safe spaces, you know, and having a cup of tea at the end of it, we've not really gone out there. Yes, we've had safe conversations on social media. We've written, some of us, a few papers here and there. But we have not really engaged with helping our fellow citizens know that the role of a member of parliament is not to build roads.
So Daniel, how do we change that then?
Thank you. I think, Prof, it is impossible for us to remain comfortable in our chairs. We have to inconvenience ourselves and begin to reach out.
Okay.
I like what Pilak has done by pushing the student out of the ivory tower. I'm sorry, the ivory tower is now even banned. But we need to push ourselves.
It will
out
be
of-
restored soon.
Yes, it will be restored. But maybe
You can
Pilak,
send the money to my mobile money.
yeah, but you see, I think the Joels and this group of students who've left the ivory tower, left the gates of Makerere, and started interfacing have been of better use than many of us professors.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I'll come to Evan, but let me go back to Doreen. Doreen, you did mention some people have come to power through the barrel of the gun, through money. We know, and some of us watch you from a distance. We know you've not come to power through any of those. We know you've been elected genuinely. What were some of your promises that you made to your constituents, and how do you feel in terms of being held accountable? Has your constituents actually held you accountable to those promises?
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I didn't win through the power of the gun. I'm one of the few that defeated the power of the gun, because even on my election day, the guns were very present in Makerere University. Now, have I delivered to the expectations of my constituents? Certainly, yes, and that is why they are going to revote me. Because I promised them that I would fight for them, both in council, in the streets, and also in the trenches. I promised my constituents that I would defend them against external aggression. I did that. I promised them that I would defend them against unfair policies. I did that. And mine actually is my office as the Deputy Lord Mayor. My office as the LT Favourman Councillor is a revolutionary office. My constituents sent me to KCCA to continue fighting for this country, to continue fighting for change, to continue fighting for a better Uganda. And I can say that I have ably done. Thank you.
How do you balance this? I envy you sometimes, but also feel sorry for you, because you represent a constituency that has different interests. It's cosmopolitan. You have the youth, you have the elite in Makerere, you have the women in Wandegea market, and so how have you balanced that in terms of one promises, but also in terms of accounting to those different constituencies?
Thank you so much. To first correct you, Wandega is not part of my constituents. Okay. My constituents is Makerere University. Okay. I'm a leader who really knows how to handle the different interests of the people. For example, there are women who might not necessarily be interested in what I am talking about, and that all they need may be some small money to carry out entrepreneurship projects that I have ably delivered, that some of the women in my constituents are now able to make some money. I've delivered sewing machines to some of them. I've supported them in coming up with a bookmaking project. I mean, there are very many, I cannot even end them. There are those who tell you, I have my chapat stall here, I want to start a business, and I don't have money. Now, those things we do because we feel for our people, not necessarily that is our mandate as leaders. We do those things because we understand that we have a government which cannot help these people. And as leaders, we cannot afford to just stand out. We cannot afford to just stand aside as our people starve. So we do some of these things, okay, much as we understand it's not supposed to be our mandate.
Okay, thank you, Doreen. Doreen, hold the microphone. I'm still interested in you. I'm going to ask one member in the audience to help me put one question to Doreen. Sorry, this is going to be my style.
Doreen, thank you for feeling so compassionate to your electorate. My question now is, where do you get that money that you help with your people to help them start up those small businesses?
Oh, sanitize the microphone, sure. Doreen, you can go ahead as we sanitize this microphone.
Oh, Thank you so much. I get that money from my salary. I share with them. Yes, it's
Okay.
as simple as that.
Okay, Ivan, I see you are burning. Yeah.
I don't want to ask.
Ivan stopped me from mentioning that he's standing for MP representing the youth. He said I shouldn't mention that, but unfortunately. Okay, I'm not going to mention it. But let's hear from you.
Well, I think to some point we have been misrepresenting who the elite are. And to some point we have gone ahead to crucify ourselves, yet we should not crucify. Are we really elite? Are we really elite? Because from the simple definition of elite, it's a small group of people that hold disproportionate power, political power, wealth, or skill. Most of us here only have the component of skill in society. I am a lawyer, and therefore, proudly I say I qualify to be an elite. But yet, those that have political power and have disproportionate wealth are the actual elite in the true definition. So I think we have done played our part. Doctor, you've written a lot of work, a lot of papers that I have read, and I'm like, wow, they inspire me. You have taught very many. We still do a lot in civil society. And therefore, every elite, the other elite that own power, are the only ones probably disappointing us to the latter.
Okay.
But also I want to a little say that Doreen intimated that this is academic. And I want to disagree because this is a process where ideas are generated. But also when she comes off to attack an election that to some point helped her succeed in Makerere as LC5 and then up to Lord Mayor, then I think saying that elections are of less value in a despotic society is entirely not true, because we have some good people like Nyanjura, the Lord Mayor, the boss, and others, the Semjunganda, that have come even in this
some
tough
good people in
situation.
the ruling party. You're just mentioning opposition, Ivan, surely.
I do not want to to pedalize in front of the audience and the viewers online. So I will stick to the good people that I've mentioned and many others.
Okay, Ivan, I'm going to step you there, and I moved Iran. There is the microphone for her. Irene, you appear to believe so much that, we would have accountability if the multi-party system is working. How do we handle that when we are facing a problem of independence? If we are going to look at political parties as the structures through which politicians should account, how do we extract that out of independence?
Are you saving the hard questions for me? So I don't think that the institutions per se would help us with accountability. And this is where I guess I fundamentally disagree with Ivan, because in his opening remarks, he said that the best way to promote accountability is to look at institutions. In a country like Uganda, when you look at the nature of our institutions, it's very difficult for you to use the traditional system of institutions to generate accountability. I've already given the complexity of trying to approach using the courts. And also there's the challenge that we have if you try to use parliament. Again, because of the way the politics is skewed in favor of one political party over another. I think that the best way, if you're looking at promoting accountability, is to look outside of institutions. Now, when you think about politics, when you think about elections, Chair, I don't know if I still have audience.
Yeah, please.
All right. When you think about elections and when you think about accountability for promises, the people who consume these promises or these election promises are the voters. It's the voters who remember what their leaders said. It's the voters who remembered what promises were made during the elections. And when you look at institutions of power, politicians listen to voters, which is why during elections you'll have a lot of politicians doing all manner of things just to get the vote. And so when you're looking at accountability, you go back to the source of power, and which means that you go back to the people, which is why all the discussions around accountability ultimately come back to how do you empower the voters to be able to either demand for that accountability or get it in some form or the other. Now, to tie this to the question you're asking about what's the elite doing, I think outside of traditional institutions, you have two forms that you see accountability being peddled. And the elite is very involved in one regard, if we're defining the elite liberally to include middle class. And that is that they're setting up independent monitoring initiatives. So most of these are really coming from very well educated, very well connected people. Most of the civil society organizations that are working around monitoring and accountability have the resources to operate nationally. So whether you're looking at Parliament through AFLI when they were running the parliamentary scorecard, I don't know if people remember that. Whether you're looking at Accord that runs the local government scorecard, whether you're looking at initiatives like Parliament Watch that are then partnering with the institution of Parliament to hold government accountable. So one form is that a lot of very well educated people who understand these technical concepts take up the mandate to push for independent monitoring. They're the ones who go to court to challenge a number of these systems and make sure that the environment works.
So Irene, are you saying yes?
Yeah, let me just finish the second point, which is that then the second way to enforce accountability, which people in power really do not like, is through social movements, through social protest. Because that's the way that people come up. Voting means it's a choice. You know, I'm doing it because I want to. I think this person is going to do the work. When they don't do the job, then voters have a right, and it's constitutionally protected around the world, to be able to protest that I voted you to do this, you did not do this, and therefore I'm protesting what you're doing.
So are you saying the political system really doesn't matter? As long as, so it can be movement, it can be multi-party, it can be proportional representation, we can have independence, as long as we have a citizenry which is empowered.
No. I was talking about this in the context of our current political system. Now, if you look at Uganda's history, before 1986, we were really ruled through military leadership, right? If you discount that point between independence 1962 to 1966, once that first constitution was overthrown, legitimacy was got through coups. Now, that means that within the military and whichever government came in, the systems that were in place, there were military systems of holding the government accountable until the 1980 election. But even then, where people disputed the 1980 election, they still reverted because there was no constitution then to hold that process accountable. And so that's why you had someone like Museveni who stood in the 1980 elections, and others actually, the other people who broke out into the guerrilla movements, but it was his that was most successful. Now, post 1986, we then moved to first the movement system, but now we are in a military democracy. Okay. So we are talking within this context that what happens when you have a multi-party system of government. In a multi-party democracy, the ideal, and it's important to start from the ideal, in the same way that when you're trying to teach your child, you say that the ideal is not to lie, right? And then as the child grows, they figure out their own standard of what that ideal is.
And sometimes it becomes good to lie.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, the child eventually,
as they grow up, they discover that they are good lies, the bad and good lies.
Yes.
Okay.
But ultimately, in a democracy, the idea is that the power should ultimately rely to the voter.
Okay.
So if you're interested in promoting accountability, the question becomes, how do we create an environment that makes it easy for anyone who has a problem with the way politicians are running the government to protest or to make that hard?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is an argument that has been coming out since years. But first, hold the microphone. I asked, there are certain tables I selected, and I asked each table to come up with the most intelligent question for a specific panelist. There is a table there that I asked to come up with the most intelligent question for Irene. Are you ready, table? Yes, please.
Are you directing your question to Ivan or me?
Yes. Hello. Yeah. Thank you. This is
Ivan. That's Ivan.
Ivan. Yes.
are not yet ready.
Okay, thank you. In talking of accountability in terms of cleaning up the institutions, but I think he has forgotten that these institutions, there is they are actually presidential appointments meant in these institutions. Most times, some of these institutions they pay their allegiance to the appointee, which completely complicates their terms of transparency in terms of delivering to the needs of the citizens. And so most of the times you find that they serve the interest of the appointee. So, but generally also, we should also take note that there is no political will to make this institution function the way they are supposed to do, or they are supposed to function. Anyway, I wanted just to emphasize to him basically on what he had talked about.
Thank you so much. I would not I would not act like an ostrich that hides the head with the entire body left outside. It is true our institutions are rotten. It is true. And cleaning up institutions does not mean in any way changing the people that are there. But it also goes to restructuring the same to make sure that, one, they are functional, two, they are not held hostage by those in power, like the appointing authority. So, and when you say that there was an argument that it is not the most important thing, I want to assure you, those we vote, the politicians work within particular institutions, parliament, we have KCCA, provided we do not have a clean KCCA structurally, the people you send there, you actually waste time. You get. Therefore, it is my belief that even when we have some good ones, we need to focus on cleaning up institutions.
Okay, thank you. This table here, Dr. Ruweza, this is your table here. They have come up with the most intelligent question.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, panelists. Whenever people think of politics, especially here in Uganda, they think first and foremost violence and conflict. And it absolutely affects promises and accountability issues. How can this be changed?
Dr. Ruweza, that's for you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think it was mentioned even in the first panel, you are not going to avoid civic education in this debate. And I think one of the reasons as to why we are where we are is because people have not been educated. They don't know what to expect, what to demand, and what to even think about when we are talking about politics. Two, we have an Access to Information Act. It's about time that this information is made available. And the longer we keep people in the dark, the more they will think of politics being another way to make money. Someone once said that the most profitable business now is a political appointment.
Okay.
So I think the Access to Information Act must begin to see light of day. Thirdly, I'm calling for a judiciary that stops sitting back and begins to implement bits and portions of judicial activism.
Okay.
I think that is something we could discuss later on, but yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. There is a Nyanjura table here.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Nyanjura. Since you came to power through the ballot and not the gun or bread, and have already showed that accountability and service delivery through delivering on your promises, some of which you've told us today, how do you intend on encouraging the same spirit throughout the country?
Yeah. There will always be those who break. Yeah. Absolutely. And still to Doreen Nyanjura, you talked about picking from your salary to help these people, which is definitely not sustainable. And but we're also looking at the NRM government priding in all these programs, youth livelihood program, women entrepreneurship. Now we are hearing a Myoga and all these things. And we see them talk about them as successes, yet we know that on the ground they have all these issues. What has been your role in ensuring that these programs help the people other than you picking from your pockets? Because these programs are what can be sustained and not from your salary.
Okay. Thank you, Doreen. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think, let me first respond to Ivan Bowe's question. He talked about me participating in an election that I believe to be sham. Now, should the opposition participate in this sham process? My answer is yes. Not with a view that we expect Mr. Museveni to drive to Kolola and hand over power to us. But for us, in the opposition, we see this as a platform to enrich our struggle. We see this as a platform to galvanize the population through civil action. And largely, this is one of the smallest opportunities that we have to rally the masses against the regime. So that is why we participate in the sham process. And to go to the, unfortunately, I've forgotten the name.
It's the Nyanjura table, let's call it.
The Nyanjura table. If I have critically analyzed our campaign message, especially us from FDC and the opposition, you realize that ours is different. We rarely tell people we are going to build roads, we are going to do this. And by the way, our voters understand that we don't have capacity to deliver services under the current military dictatorship. That is why you'll hardly hear any of them asking for those services. Many of them call us asking for personal assistance. Oh, my child is sick, can you come in and help? My landlord is chasing me and that. But for us as leaders, we be honest to our people and we tell them that it's very hard for us to attain certain things, for us to have services delivered, unless we see a regime change. And my message has been very clear from the word go. And about it being sustainable to get money from my pockets, definitely it's not sustainable. But what do I do? If that is the only way I can help out my people, then we shall do that. Yes, there is money at KCCA allocated for youth livelihood programs. And actually, a few days back at KCCA, we launched a CPAC report. And some of this money was even misappropriated. And we are waiting for accountability from the people, from those that misappropriated the money. So even the little money that is there is not put to its proper use. And maybe on my side, one of the disadvantages that I have, people don't know Makerere University, but I think Bowe knows Makerere University, that we also have the dregs of society. We also have the downtrodden, people who are living in very poor conditions. But like they say, if you come to KCCA, they don't look at Makerere University. The first considerations will be given to Katanga. They will tell you, oh, there's YEC, there's competition. However, the good news is, gone are the days when Makererians used to say, oh, projects don't reach Makerere. Currently, we have also been able as leaders to secure some projects for our people in Makerere University. Those that do events, they have got some chairs, they have got some tables, and some few projects for the women involved in making books, involved in doing some bitenje. But I'm telling you, the money is very small and it cannot ably address the challenges that encounter the people that we represent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see the iron table is itching. Then I'll come to the independents.
Thank you so much. To Irene, of course. Basing on these statements, we have to keep all the useful people away from Lukwago. And then I prefer sleeping MPs and then just wake them up to vote. And then we have the Maje. And a scenario like when some people, in quotes, break into offices of the independent organizations that are doing independent monitoring for us. And then they break into their offices and their information that is supposed to be evidence for different things is destroyed or taken away. Do we really have reason to continue going to the polling stations in this country?
Let's wait, I think. So it's a good question. It's a good question. So when you have, let me contextualize the question. Let me know if I've gotten it right. It's that when you have an environment that, because the examples that you're giving are civic space examples, that when you have an environment where the people in power, the leadership in power, intentionally curtail civic space or space for civil society or citizens to freely participate or express themselves, are elections still necessary? This is the question that I'm answering. I think that yes, they are, because then and my answer is because what's the alternative, right? And if you look at our history, we've seen what the alternative could potentially be. That if we say, no, we don't want an electoral system, there are a lot of problems with democracy as a system. But based on research and based on the application of democracy around the world, it's currently the most successful system of government, regardless of the challenges that it has. And so the question should not be that should we not participate? And I think the Honorable gave a good example that as the opposition, yes, there's a problem, but if you choose to walk away rather than participate, you're still going to allow the system to perpetuate. So the question for me, I think, becomes how do we then address some of the challenges that are there? And it's not necessarily an easy question to answer. I remember earlier this year, I did a legal assessment for the Uganda National NGO Forum on the environment for civil society to participate. When you read that report, it looks depressing, because on one context, if you're an organization that is working on non-civic issues, if you're working around immunization, if you're working around what they call WASH, water aid and sanitation, you're quite free to operate. But the more you operate around aspects of civic engagement, civic education, the right for citizens to protest, the right for citizens to vote and to challenge power, then the restrictions around the laws make it significantly difficult for you to operate. Whether you're looking at the NGO Act, whether you're looking at the Public Order Management Act, whether you're looking at the Computer Misuse Act, it really makes it hard for people who work in this particular area to be able to have their voices heard and to bring citizens around. Again, it comes back to that point, which of course it sounds like when you repeat something so much, it gets boring, like how you tell people keep washing your hands, but it's still important, that the power ultimately in a democracy has to lie with the people. Now, you have a system where you're creating a pressure cooker situation where people can't speak freely. As civil society or people who are interested in this, we have to constantly keep trying to work to elevate that environment, either by going to court, challenging, petitioning, trying to work with the institutions as Ivan proposes, to change the laws, but ultimately find ways to keep that energy where social movements can keep growing and rising. Because politicians listen to people, and they listen to people in numbers. NGOs, civil society can do a lot of the work, but the access and the reach of civil society is very limited. One organization like Accord is not able to reach 43 million people. However, social movements, once they grow, spread horizontally around and people coalesce around certain issues. So, and this is why a lot of politicians in a democracy like ours will try to make sure it's difficult for people to come together and for people to organize. Now, I don't have a quick answer. There's no quick solution to something like that. It's that you keep going back to the ballot, you try. In between, you keep trying to ensure that there are movements that are coming up and you can protest. Eventually, the system will give because history repeats itself. And when you look outside Uganda, in the contexts where governments have not made it possible, have not given space for citizens to freely protest or freely criticize or freely ask for accountability on certain issues, eventually that government gets overthrown in a social movement situation. And even where you remove aspects where, for example, we say, oh, the United States intervened, you know, you can look at a situation like a country like Burkina Faso or Zimbabwe. Eventually, that pressure will build up. And eventually the people will get what they want, no matter how long it takes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask Florence Ndagire whether you have any views on the question whether the system and processes in place allow persons with disabilities to actually demand for political accountability.
Thank you very much, Prof. The system itself doesn't allow persons with disabilities to demand for accountability because mostly, even in the manifestos of contestants within their various political parties, do not stipulate any representation of the kind to enable persons with disabilities to demand for accountability. In most cases, when we fail to be counted, when we fail to demand, public policy will also leave us out, as well as public budgeting. But I also had a question for Nyanjura. I wonder how does she manage competing interests of students at Makerere University whose parents are poor, they are doing online education during the COVID-19, and they are supposed to report anyway. Some of them have retakes and cannot afford retake fees because business came to a standstill. In the era of contesting for the 2021 elections, how are you going to manage those competing interests?
Okay, thank you, Florence. In addition to that, I'm going to take 3 questions from independents. The first independent here, the gentleman here, has been putting up his hand.
I take it that Prof does not have corona, so even if I don't sometimes. Yes. Once again, my name is Olgarama Daniel, and my first question goes to Comrade Dr. Weza. Professor Rumumba, a senior Pan-Africanist, one time stated that I heard over 200 town hall conferences and talks. I articulated the policies affecting my people. A day before the voting, my opponent came, dished out money, and I was overwhelmingly and resoundingly defeated. What do you have to say about this statement in the context of what we are discussing today? 2, to Nyanjura. Deputy Road Mayor, what is your political ideology that drives you? Assuming the political party that you are inclined to takes over power come 2021, and you are appointed a cabinet minister, especially Minister of Constitutional Affairs and Justice, what would you want to see done as far as the structure of the Electoral Commission is concerned? To dear Irene, I had for everyone, but yes. Every electoral cycle, more than half of those elected that were representing the population do not come back. In the circumstances of the highly questionable civic and voter education that we have been discussing, do you think that they are not returned based on fair judgment of the electorate. I thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I take it because I had left, so I wouldn't know so much. Boy, you were a guild president at Makerere. Is there a club of the former guild presidents of especially Makerere University? And do you have a political assignment that once given, you don't have to be given an opportunity? Do you have a plan in that club of invading and shaping the political space in Uganda? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Professor. It's to Ivan. It's connected to the last question from Daniel. I watch with concern the past guild presidents of Makerere University. Many of them, to me, how I interpret is that they posture themselves very strategically. That we believe in you, the students believe in you, but once you leave and you've gotten this political space, many of our guild presidents have done things or have gone into, I don't know whether you understand. You find that people we looked up to are now in state houses. When I met Honorable Susanna Bo was a guild president during my time. There's a time I met her down there. I said, Susan, I could not believe among all people, you could just go like that. She said, my dear, if you cannot win them, you join them. So there's that tendency of if you can't win them, you join them. And these very good ideas just get lost into the people that we are really trying to talk about. So I want to ask this because I don't know if 5 years after, you will still be on this side. What happens? What happens? The right side of history. Yes, of service delivery, of democracy and human rights respect. What happens to our guild presidents and what assurances can we have from you as a future politician that exactly that you are not going to do what? To also get identified and then you start saying, you know, now we couldn't win them, we joined them.
Thank you. And Ivan, there is a miserable photo of Galgitho that is circulating on social media. Not that you comment on it. Two more independents, then we move on.
My question is to Nyanjura. When we're talking about accountability, it is in two facets. There is individual accountability of the politicians, and then there is also the institutional accountability. When a question was posed to you about how accountable you have been to your electorate, you only seem to concentrate on the individual accountability. And yet, very pertinent to the discussion we're having is also the institutional accountability. The answers you're giving is I've used my salary, and that is more of a personal accountability. How and what have you done to ensure institutional accountability to the very people that voted you into office? Thank you.
Thank you. Poor Nyanjura is like chicken on a buffet. Everybody eats chicken.
Thank you, Professor. I have a question and just a comment to the rest of the panelists. Yes, actually, my question was also going to Nyanjura, and it flows from what Dominic has just said. I understand the challenges with the KCC Act as far as the political leadership is concerned. But we have a KCCA now, which is entirely under the opposition. And you're saying that the way you're supporting your people, you pick you part of your salary and give them and so on. So I'm failing to see a difference between you and the NRM, because actually that is how retired President Museveni has also survived. He throws handouts to elites and so on. And remember, by the FOM, he has an entire national treasure at his disposal. Actually, right now, I think the budget for donation is around 200 billion. So I'm wondering how you're going to compete with him, you who is getting just salaries. Then lastly, which is a comment, yes, when you look at the attrition rate in Parliament, and it actually connects to the whole issue of money and elections, the attrition rate in Parliament is so high, majority of members of Parliament don't come back. But also, in this country, one of the highest paid people are members of parliament. And indeed, they spend a lot of money right from the time when they get into office and during the campaigns. So I fail to understand whether those ones who come to compete with them, they are the ones who come with a lot of money, and for them they have less, or the citizens realize that, yes, the other time you gave me 1,000, but on the 1,000 you added on other promises which you didn't fulfill, so I'm penalizing you for the poor service delivery or not fulfilling what you had told us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are going to this gentleman. He will keep his comment short.
Thank you. My name is Emmanuel Mbonye, and I'm the Speaker of Mukono District Council. So I'm a politician like Nyanjura at a level of councillor, LC5. Nyanjura was speaking at a level of Lord Councillor. Now, there are leaders in the village, like districts of Buyukwe, parts of Mukono, that in most of the elections, the turnover is about 80%, those who don't come back because of the overwhelming needs of the people. And the councillors don't have a salary like the Lord councillors do. They only have sitting allowances, which is a 20% of the previous collection of local revenue, which is like 100, how much this year in Mukono? Yeah. The local revenue is about, the allowance is about 250,000 every sitting, and it's not mandatory that every month they sit. So when we talk about the promises people make to the people and how they help them, it is so different. So when you hold such a meeting and look at politics and the promises and how you can feel for your people in the city kind of setting, it is so different from the rural setting. So councillors in the villages are overwhelmed, and some of them run out of their positions even before the end of the term. They disappear and go to Dubai and work because they cannot hold. You see, LC5 is the next level to parliament, but parliament get up over 20 million shillings per month, 30 millions, but the council has only 200,000. So what do I have to say? I think the need for civic education here is what we need to do intensively in the villages where we come from and the whole public. Because even councillors who come to stand, they make promises forgetting that they are going to find a 5-year development plan of the things that they are only supposed to monitor the implementation. And they keep on promising, we shall make for you roads, the boreholes are going to be drilled, and all those things. So, Madam Nyanjura, in your struggle, me, I am NRM, but in your struggle to come to power, because we have been there for a long time, I know you will come, or NRM will be here to stay. If you don't change the way you preach your gospel, come to the villages and tell the people that you can win the votes without giving money. But people in the villages are very poor, and the leadership is, in Uganda, I say, obukulembeze bwa kibogwe, because the people who want to work and have their families do well, they cannot enter such a thing. For us who have come, we have sacrificed a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment. I think it deserves a clap. And I now understand why councillors also try to manage the councillors in Kampala by using the word Lord Councillor.
So my question goes to Irene. Yeah, in the context of a conversation we're having, and in your opening remarks, you said something about you cannot hold politicians accountable to the promises that they make to the people. I'm not going to come and tell Nyanjura I do not have weapons from Makere. Please, and shillings for the women's group or whatever. So what, in your opinion, as a political analyst, is naming and shaming politicians in our context here in Uganda as a mechanism of holding politicians accountable? What is your opinion on that mechanism of accountability?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to leave it at that for the independents. I'm going to go back to the panel, but this is what I'm going to do just to warn you ahead of time. after the panelists have spoken, I'm going to choose one person I've observed who has spent all the time on WhatsApp to summarize for us the discussion. So please give up your WhatsApp and pay attention. Let's start with Dr. Rueza. From Dr. Rueza, we shall move to Ivan, Irene, and then lastly Doreen, because Doreen has so many questions.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you to all the people who have made their submissions. Prof, I'm going to answer the question from Mr. Rugarama regarding Professor Lumumba's dilemma by giving an example of what happened in Ukraine. So Ukraine has a pastor there called Sunday Adeleja, who is a Nigerian actually. He went on a mission in Ukraine of economic empowerment. It is that economic empowerment that led to the Orange Revolution, if I recall correctly. And Sunday Adeleja, actually the government wanted to kick him out, but because the members of his church had become economically empowered and were the ones that were holding the economy of Ukraine, they had the economic and therefore political muscle to be able to say, don't touch our man. I think the solution will be in economic empowerment of our people. It is not going to happen overnight. Singapore, UK, USA has had a long trail. So like the Budonians say, Gachari, Mabaga, as far as economic empowerment is concerned. Says the Murian. Yes, yes, and the Ugandan. Two, to emphasize my point, there is a gentleman who is now dead. You can Google him. He's called the Mountain Man. The Mountain Man lost his wife because she could not access a hospital in time because there was a mountain. So she dies. He spent the next 22 years chipping away at this mountain. And by the time he died, he had created a road to cut the distance between his village and the hospital by about almost 20 miles or so. This job, this desire for us to have the kind of political empowerment that we need, the kind of accountability is going to happen each piece at a time. It won't happen overnight. So for those of us who are in this struggle, we must continue. Those who have gone before us have done their part, but you and I must continue to do so. And how will we do so? I would like to suggest that Ugandans need to invest in thinking. USA and China, probably China has the highest number of think tanks. I think Professor Mbazira might even know the number better. Over 30 think tanks that dedicate their time to plan for what can and cannot happen. I'm talking about innovation. We must sit and think. I feel sorry for the politicians today because I could hear from the LC chairperson in Mukono and I can also hear from Nyanjura. You are adhering to the non-required demands of your electorates. Your duty is not to provide economic solutions to them. Your duty is to represent their needs before the various institutions that you represent. But you can see your mandate has been changed from a representative mandate, from a scrutiny mandate, from a financial control mandate to an NGO.
Yeah. Moreover, you don't collect taxes.
And moreover, exactly. So there is a huge problem, and we need, Professor, I think we need an overhaul of this thinking, and it will not take, and it won't be overnight to do so. So that would be my suggestion, that we need to innovate. Okay. We need to maximize the use of social media. We need to have think tanks, and we need not lose the game by slowly chipping away at this mountain. And even if it does not happen in our lifetime, we must continue to do our part.
Okay.
And that is why I would give the answer the way I have done it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Sanitize the microphone for Ivan. We shall then have Ivan. Our WhatsApper, please pay attention. I'm coming to you now.
I declare this
You've
microphone
infected it
disease-free.
again.
Well, I was tasked to explain, to inform the public if we have a club. About a year ago, I started mobilizing my fellow guild presidents. And at the moment, we are still in discussions on how we move forward. Now than before, Mackay needs its former leaders as we look forward to rebuilding the ivory tower, but also looking forward to other bigger things that surely are not going on at our alma mater. Because every guild president, at least a minimum, have a fellowship of 40,000 students. I am glad that I am in touch with my guild presidents, because whereas I am someone's guild president, I also have my guild president, and I can proudly say I'm a proud 80th guild president. And one of the issues on the table is that we cannot sit back. The time has come for us to guide this country because we have the capacity. And I can assure you that process is ongoing. It's not an easy one because of, one, the nature of people they are or we are, but it's work in progress. And I'm so certain that at a later time, we shall have a discussion or a conversion of the sort. Why do some get lost? I usually say I don't congratulate guild presidents when they win that election. I don't. If they were ranked, I congratulate them upon finishing. Because the dangers of that position, that it has two edges. It either makes you or destroys you. We have also to appreciate that that position gives you too much power and too much pressure at a very young age. At 22 or at 21, you're sitting with professors and discussing with them and at times even rubbishing them. At a particular point, you are handling a budget of about 300 millions. You are in a position whereby the head of state calls you directly. You are in a position where all your relatives think you've arrived. You also have issues with your own constituents, because whereas people think that everyone in Mackay life is all good, it's not all good. Even with the students, and in all honesty. So we also find ourselves in the same cycle as any other politician in the country, even worse. But that notwithstanding, you also have school. So at times it's overwhelming.
And you also got into power through logistics.
Well, my case was different. I will speak for myself. I will speak for myself, but it was rather different. And yeah, it was rather different because the logistics, the funding of the campaign was from the students themselves.
So it is the students who are giving those minty sweets.
No, actually, they were funding for the band, for the posters, and the fuel, a little bit of fuel for me to do my groundwork. So I want us to appreciate the special circumstances under which young men and women who get into that position face. But also there are future demands that from here, what next? And perhaps the biggest danger is that guild presidents, mostly we are not so friendly to government in terms of what we push for the benefit of our constituents. And you get to be fought within the party where you belong to, but also those you've been opposed to.
Okay.
So generally, you are in a position of, you are an endangered species in the Ugandan political space. And that's why some disappear, or some take very hard decisions. I do not want to blame them for taking the decisions they take, but all I am so sure about is that those decisions they make to compromise with government are hard ones.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Ivan. So
I'll be consistent. I've been consistent for 5 years since my presidency, and I do not intend to put a price tag on my reputation or on my record.
Okay, please sanitize the microphone for Irene. And I think from what you've said, myself here and Dr. Rueza have an offer for you. You owe us a book inside the guild presidency. And the offer, myself and Dr. Rueza are going to edit that book free of charge.
Much more humble. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, so I am going to respond to 3 questions. 2 of them were directed at me and one was directed at Ivan, but I feel that I would like to respond to it. The first question was from Mr. Garama, which was that, during every electoral cycle, more than half of the MPs do not come back. We're asking, are they not returned based on fair judgment, or, trying to understand why. I think that, and the example from the gentleman who's a speaker from Okono gives you a sense of what the politics looks like. A good place to understand it is that there's an increasingly blurry line between what people or voters perceive as promises from the politician versus what they also perceive as expectations. When you talk to politicians, they are overwhelmed by the amount of expectation from the electorate. So they're expected to pay school fees, they're expected to attend funerals, they're expected to do this. There's a lot of expectation. And for citizens, for a lot of voters, they perceive that expectation as, if you do not fulfill it, as basically breaking your promise as a politician. So that line is increasingly getting blurred. It comes back to the discussion around this entire theme, around the relationship with service delivery. The more service delivery breaks down, or the more people feel that the institutions are not able to deliver, the more people will turn to politicians, because politicians are voted to represent the views of people within the government, and the government is supposed to, in turn, create a cycle where services reach people. So the pressure will go to politicians. Now, what this is interesting for people who like to analyze politics is that the turnover, and I'm very, my interest was piqued when you're saying that the turnover is up to 70%, at 90% at a lower local government level. And I think that, you see, when you look, a lot of times when people are analyzing Ugandan politics, we analyze a presidential election. But when you look at that turnover, it shows you that there's a lot of discontent that's coming up. So obviously that discontent is going to hit the person you access daily the most, which is the LC1, LC5. And so that turnover is highest at 90. When you look at the parliament, the turnover has reached 70%. Mr. Ogarama, the Research World International actually did a survey after the 2016 election on why there was such a high turnover. And the biggest reason that came out was that people were really frustrated. They were disappointed. In fact, that's how they mentioned it. People were disappointed. So that is going to continue, and it will eventually spill over to the national election. No matter how much you try to cap it, the more you cap it, you create a pressure cooker system. Eventually, that pressure is going to spill, and it will affect the outcome of the national. So the trend you will see eventually when the president changes, because it will happen, is that initially there'll even be a lot of, volatility. The first few presidents will not be able to stay in for long. and then it will stabilize eventually as people try to figure out what's a system where we can trust the politicians afresh. Now, the second question was about what happens when activists cross over. Actually, the world over, people are very curious about this question. That a lot of people who are activists, you know, are very loud, they're very active. And then when they cross over, there's a way they change. And there's research that has been done by the World Movement for Democracy. It's called the Crossover Initiative, where they've been trying to understand what happens in that when there's a transition. So they've done a lot of research surveys and interviews with very prominent activists around the world who have then transitioned to government, both in political appointment positions, either elected or working in technical capacities, to try and understand what the difference is. From that research, what comes out from many former activists is that the playing field is completely different. And so, for example, you come from civil society where you're always on TV, you're talking about so many different things, yes, but you go back to your office and you're supervising 10 people. Your budget is about 300,000, maybe 500, $500,000, if we're counting it in US dollars. And then you move, there was one particular activist who moved from an office like that and was working in the Ministry of Education, where she said she got so overwhelmed because her one signature meant that 5 million children could either eat food or not. And so there's that distinction. And so the scale of what you're dealing with significantly changes. And so your approach to doing business has to change, because then you have to navigate so many other issues that come in. And now you have to negotiate. You change from being very, not antagonistic, but from demanding on behalf of citizens, you change to trying to move things forward and to push change. And because it's so slow, you have to change your approach to more of a negotiation style. And so that's the experience. So it's called the Crossover Initiative, if you're interested in looking at it. The last question was from Elizabeth to me, which was, her question was that I'd say that you can't hold politicians accountable. So then can naming and shaming help? So I didn't say that you can't hold politicians accountable. I said it's very difficult to enforce. You can't enforce. The easiest way, really, honestly, if you could sue, if politicians knew that there is 500 million penalty for telling lies in court, you will go to jail for 20 years if you lie. It would reduce the number of lies. That would be the easiest, and that's the ideal. But like I shared at the beginning, it's very difficult to go and challenge politicians for their lies in court because of what I explained there. And so that means that the best way to promote accountability goes outside of institutions and it comes back to people. Because again, the power for politicians is amongst people. So naming and shaming is a very, very effective method for trying to hold politicians accountable. Scorecards are developed on the foundation of naming and shaming. Because then once you criticize and you show the poor performance, then you're hoping that people will then elect someone else who will deliver on their promises. But I think now when you start to look at the trajectory of Uganda and how our politics is moving, it's extremely important that people who work in civil society or academia find ways to promote an environment that helps people protest freely, or that helps people speak out freely, or that helps people communicate with their government freely and are not afraid. Because the turnover that you're seeing at lower local government, at parliamentary level, it's eventually going to come to a national level. And it's about how do you create a system where those voices can be heard and managed in a way that does not create chaos, you know? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Irene. We shall have Doreen.
Thank you very much. You asked me tough questions, but I'm also a tough lady, so I'll attempt to answer them. And I'll start with the question of what would I change or what would I do if I'm appointed the constitutional minister, the Minister of Justice. I think to begin with, I would put in place a Peace and Reconciliation Committee to handle atrocities committed by the NRM. That is very important. And two, I believe I would also make a new constitution that we currently have. We all know how it came into place. People's backs were broken, MPs were beaten like cattle, and of course our views as Ugandans are not ably represented. So I'll make sure we have a new constitution in place that represents the will of the people. And three, I would also do away with a candidate appointing an electoral commission. I think that is very wrong. That you have an electoral commission, before they do anything, they run to one of the candidates and ask him, should we have scientific elections or not? When he says we should have scientific elections, the chairman electoral commission reports that I consulted one of the candidates and he said we should have scientific elections. And I also received another question from my brother who happens to be NRM. My brother, what are you doing in NRM? Well, you're not serving the people. You've actually, the NRM you're supporting has turned Ugandans into beggars. So I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to our side. Yes. Thank you so much. And there was another question that was posed to me about the conflicting interests of the students. I think personally my stand has been very clear in as far as fighting for the Macarians is concerned. Much as I sit on the University Council, the views of some of the council members are not binding to me, and I've been very, very vocal. Even when the 15% tuition increment was increased, I was at the front line. Actually, this even landed me into trouble. For those of you who have internet, you can go and search that the Vice Chancellor had to reach an extent of writing to the Minister of Kampala and the Lord Mayor to make sure I am recalled from council. But for me as Nyanjura, I represent the interests of my people. I represent the interests of Ugandans. I don't really represent interests of individuals, and that has been my stand. And of course, you talked about internet, online studies. A survey was actually conducted from that report that was given to us by the DVC in charge of academics, and 75% of the students said they were okay with them having some online studies. But also, I don't only represent the majority, I also represent the minority. And we have been having a discussion with student leaders on how to approach different telecom companies so that they offer free internet packages for some of the students that will be left behind. That discussion is ongoing, and we hope most likely it will mature. Ivan, you talked about guild presidents. I'm also a former guild vice president. Is your platform only for guild presidents? Because as a guild vice president, I'm also a president in my own right. Maybe you'll talk about that. And of course, thank you so much. I take note of your concern, and I can tell you that at the level of a policymaker at KCCA, we actually came up with an ordinance to cater for the PWDs. I'll probably give you a copy of that, and you read the details. Oh no. People, this is not a laughing matter, but really as leaders, that shows maybe we are lagging behind, and we need to do something, and as far as that is concerned. But also to report that in Makara University, I sit on the Students' Affairs Committee. And on that Students' Affairs Committee, you have a representative. So probably I'm going to have a chat with him, and then we can ably plan. But I apologize for that. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me here. Probably I wouldn't have picked such brilliant ideas from her. So I'm so grateful. And then there's someone who asked me that why do I only talk about my achievements? I talked about my achievements because the question that was asked me was specifically looking at my achievements. However, as an institution, we have despite all the challenges, we have really attained very many achievements. We have come up with an infrastructure master plan, street lighting master plan. We have a market ordinance in place. We also have challenges of KCC law enforcement officers, and as policymakers, we also have come up with a law in place. But we have also fought for accountability. For those of you who remember me very well, even during this COVID-19 pandemic. You saw me ask the minister to return the 1 billion that we couldn't trace. A few weeks ago, you saw us launch the CPAC report, where billions of taxpayers' money have been stolen. And this is a fight that we are going to continue pursuing. But in the interest of time, I'll give you a copy of this book. It has all the achievements for the 5 years that we have been at City Hall. Now, to conclude, I think maybe I was misunderstood because I heard someone talk about giving money, how it's not sustainable. I think Bowe here can testify that personally in my 2016 election, I was just an activist. I didn't have money. I could even hardly afford airtime. And the few resources that I used were actually from students. And those are the ones that facilitated my campaigns. But also to emphasize that we are fighters. And also fighters need to live. So if I start a project for my fellow fighters, it's for them to live so that we fight and see change at the end of the day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. What an excellent panel. We've come to the end of this panel. But before I close the panel, I promised I would pick my WhatsApper. I've identified my catch, the WhatsApper here, who in 2 sentences is going to summarize for us what he has picked from this discussion.
Anyway, I am happy to be here. That's one. I had a discussion and followed it, but it was almost to me abstract, because some of these things should be clear, that we are attacking from the front and that the junta is real. For you to come, for Irene, she said that there is democracy, multi-party democracy, a democracy where backs of MPs are beaten, broken, while... No, I can... You said I didn't follow, but I followed, so I'm going to follow one by one. Irene said that we have a democracy, systems to follow, and therefore respect. You have no democracy, you have no election. Irene, you have no vote. Because if your vote can be rigged, you have none. That's one. Two, Bowe, in his own talkings, he continues to ask why we participate in elections. In Uganda, last election, one candidate went across campaigning for president. He was being given money by the poor people to speak about here. And another one was giving envelopes. Those people are the ones who shall stand on their backs through those elections and liberate the country. I want to thank Nyanjura for being more clear and for being very resolute. For Professor, thank you for being more academic. Write more papers. Thank you.
Thank you. So sometimes WhatsAppers are actually following. I thought he was not following at all. So thank you so much, colleagues, the audience, the panelists. I think my panelists deserve a hand clap, but you see, Ugandans never follow instructions. First listen to the instructions. We are going to have a hand clap for each panelist. And then we shall judge by the size of the hand clap who the best panelist was. So could we have a panelist for Irene, our panelist? Could we have a hand clap for Ivan? Could we have a hand clap for Daniel? Could we have a hand clap for Doreen? Could we lastly have a hand clap for me? Thank you so much. I'm going to hand back this microphone to, was it Joseph or Arnold? Thank you so much.
Yes.
Well done, well done.
Thank you so much to our panelists and the moderator, Professor Christopher Mbazira. I'll now invite Madame Diana to share with us a summary of the deliberations, and then we'll have closing remarks and call it a day. Madame Diana.
Thank you very much, Joseph, and thank you so much, members, for staying with us. I must confess that for the 7 national conferences that we have held in Makerere in the main hall since 2013 or 14, I think this is going to be memorable in very many ways. Very, I don't think we've had a conference like this in terms of impact, in terms of deliberations, and in so many other ways. So thank you so much, everyone who has been a part of this. Although I'm not the one giving closing remarks, but I feel very happy that we've been able to pull off this very relevant theme, and in a way that I think will have very great impact. So I was taking a few notes, and then I will just point out some of the action points. As organizers, as organizing institutions, we normally want to have some bit of impact. We don't end up having the conference, but we look for action points that we can work on, we can be able to implement and be able to report on in the next conference. So because this theme is on elections and service delivery, I think that time frame within which we need to act is not even going to be so long. So from the discussion, there are some action points that I wrote down that as organizers will be able to meet and agree on how we're able to carry forward those points. I think they largely come from the realization that you cannot divorce politics from service delivery. So as ISA, as UKA, as School of Law, as Public Interest Law Clinic, although our main emphasis is on service delivery, especially on economic, social, and cultural rights, this conference makes us realize that politics has a critical role to play in that agenda. So we are going to have to do certain work that would otherwise be political, but trying to twist it to ensure that we are trying to meet our main objective, which is service delivery. So from panel A, what emerged is the need for advocacy around a legislation to regulate the issue of election financing, to ensure a leveled playing field for all stakeholders. That cut through a law regulation on election financing, after realizing that the same does actually affect service delivery. Then the other second point that was emphasized right from panel 1 to 2 is the need for civic education. Civic education with a subset on voter education. And this could be done in different ways. The role of the Uganda Human Rights Commission was emphasized or was recognized, and the challenges that the Uganda Human Rights Commission faces. So there's a need for partnership with the Uganda Human Rights Commission that has that constitutional mandate on civic education. So CSOs can really play a role in partnering with Uganda Human Rights Commission in achieving that. Then the role of the media. So our organizations can do some work with the media to popularize the scorecards, to popularize the reports of performance of our leaders. I know ISA has been organizing barazas in some of those local areas. So our barazas can be twisted a little to ensure that we are not only looking at the service delivery and assessment, but we are also seeing how we are bringing politicians to account in those barazas. And maybe these barazas can also be used to, create an agenda for the next election, since we're in this season. Seeking justice through courts was also raised, especially where finances in elections take the form of voter bribery. The role of social protests was also emphasized in the second panel. The role of the elite, we all have a role to play. And then the role of CSOs. So our thinking There are other points that came out, but for me, these ones were key. So I was thinking that as partners, we are going to have a proper program where we see how to strengthen, especially the civic education mandate of organizations to be able to deliver on this. A detailed report will be provided with you, since you're not many, on emails once it is approved. But that is what I was able to capture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Diana, for ably summarizing the action plan. I now invite Salima to make the closing remarks.
Thank you, Joseph. And thank you, Joseph, and everybody for being here. As we all know, this discussion started yesterday. At some point, as partners, we were not sure whether this conference would go ahead this year. As you know, we've been used to having a very huge conference. At Makere, we would have over 600 people in the room. And we felt that, doing it in a certain way would deprive many people who usually attend these conversations and who we would want to engage to be a part of the discussions. But we really deliberated and came to a conclusion that this moment is critical. It is an election year, and we really have to play our part in terms of sensitizing the public, in terms of engaging the public to be able to honor their vote and be able to put it to meaningful use in terms of ensuring that our vote works for us in terms of delivering service delivery. So we decided to do it on a small scale, and that is why you saw that we only had 3 hours yesterday on TV, which, as Diana said, was very impactful. We are getting a lot of feedback in terms of people following up on the discussions we were having, but also asking us to have more conversations and taking the conversations further down to the ground, because what was being discussed is an important issue for us as a country, especially where we stand at the moment, where service delivery seems to be declining in many respects, where we see that our public education system is on a decline, our public health system is on a decline, our electricity system, we see the growing privatization, we see the short-changing that is happening really with political leadership. And so we felt that we should go forward. So from yesterday, there were discussions that were not concluded. Some of them were raised in the keynote speech. For example, when Dr. Kabumba raised issues about the other factors that influence service delivery in our context that are not necessarily elections. And for example, the global architecture and how it influences the policy choices that we make as a country. That is a conversation that we intend to take forward. And we hope to create other fora in which we shall go into these conversations in detail. But there was also the fundamental question that, should we even be having elections? And we all agreed that as civil society, many people may say, okay, we are apolitical, but what we do is politics. Service delivery is politics, and we cannot run away from that fact. We have to accept it, take our responsibility, engage the community, and make sure that the people that we are voting into power are taking us seriously, and they know that there are consequences in terms of them not performing to our expectations. There's a lot working for us, starting with a constitutional mandate, but also the fact that we are taxpayers and we are actually the people who put these guys into the offices that they occupy. They should be answerable to us. I'm not going to repeat the recommendations, some of the action points that Diana talked about earlier. I just want to call upon all of us to play a role in our various constituencies. You know, like some of us are lucky to have come from wherever we came and we got an education. We have access to information. There are many people down there in our villages who do not know that while they struggle to even find Panadol in their hospitals, the person that they've pushed to come and speak for them in Kampala will be flying to go to India to get their own treatment. They need to have this information because it is not down there. People may argue as a country we do not have enough resources, but even the little that we have, how is our political leadership accounting for the resources that we have on the table? Some of us actually do not agree that we don't have enough resources. Between our taxes, the external assistance that we get, we should be doing better. And it is time for us to utilize our voting power to make sure that we do that. So I just want to thank everybody for having been a part of this conversation. Like Diana said, we are going to sit and reflect on the various issues that were raised and see how we can consistently keep this debate within the public domain and be able to make our own contribution to the improvement of this country and to the realization of social and economic rights. I want to specifically recognize people who are critical to pulling this off. Diana has walked out. Angela, please stand up. You haven't said anything in this meeting, but you played a critical role in doing this. Arnold Dalton, Arnold, you're in too much circulation. You don't actually stand up. Anyway, yes, and Moses Nsubuga, I don't know if he's in this room, but he's a key behind the scenes person who moved many pieces for us to be able to be here. So for the partners, it's unfortunate we could not have UHRC and EOC as usual. As you also know, many perceive such discussions to be very hot, and it wasn't proper that we insist on EOC and UHRC being with us. But anyway, they will continue being partners for this conversation going forward. So for PILAC, UCCA, and ISA, it's been a great 2 days, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Salima, for officially closing the conference. I'm just here to make administrative remarks. I believe each one of us has a lunch coupon. We'll be having our lunch at Kibb's restaurant, and then we'll have the logistical aspects. Thank you so much. For those of us who don't know Kibb's restaurant, when you walk out of this hall, it's on your right-hand side. You'll be able to find it. Okay. Okay. It has been advised that some of you could pass by the logistics table. It's at the entrance as you go out for lunch, such that you're able to relax thereafter.